Hey guys, tonight we are going on a little trip. Not to a cozy European village or a tranquil beach, but somewhere a bit austere. We're traveling back to the American Wild West of the late 1800s. And here's the twist, you're not going as a tough, gritty cowboy. Oh no. You're going as you are now, but with one major advantage: you're fabulously wealthy. You've got a trunk full of cash, a wardrobe of the finest clothes, and the refined palate of a 21st century connoisseur. Will any of that help you? Spoiler alert, you'd probably be in serious trouble before lunchtime on your first day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to see where you're listening from. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see our little community spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey doesn't begin in a dusty saloon, but in the plush, velvet-cushioned seat of a Pullman Palace car. You're heading west from Chicago, and you've paid a premium for the best ticket money can buy. Outside your polished window, the familiar, orderly landscapes of the East are slowly giving way to something wilder and more sprawling. You sip a cool drink, well, cool as hand, feel a certain smug satisfaction. This whole frontier thing isn't so bad when you do it in style. The car is paneled in rich, dark wood, the lamps are ornate brass, and a uniformed porter is at your beck and call. This, you think, is how one properly experiences manifest destiny. But the comfort is an illusion that starts to peel away layer by layer with each passing mile. The gentle rocking you imagined is more of a violent, bone-rattling shudder. The tracks, laid in a hurry across an even prairie, make the entire car lurch and sway unpredictably. The rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels you hear in old movies is drowned out by a deafening symphony of squeals, groans, and percussive jolts that make your teeth ache. You try to read the newspaper from back east, but the print dances before your eyes. You decide to get some fresh air. A terrible mistake. You slide open the heavy window, and a blast of hot, gritty wind carrying fine particles of coals that immediately fills your compartment. Within minutes, a fine black dust coats everything: the velvet seats, your crisp linen shirt, your face. You can feel it in your teeth. You quickly shut the window, but the soot is already inside. A permanent guest for the remainder of the trip. The air in the sealed car becomes thick and stale, a mixture of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and the faint, greasy smell of the dining car's perpetually boiling cabbage. This is the reality of even the most luxurious 19th century train travel. The Pullman car was indeed a marvel of its time, a rolling hotel that offered a level of comfort previously unimaginable. That's your mainstream history fact for the night. But here's a little detail they often leave out of the brochures: the ever-present danger of snakeheads. This wasn't about the reptile. The iron rails were often just strips laid over wooden beams. Sometimes, these strips would break loose, curl upwards from the pressure of the train, and violently pierce through the wooden floor of the car like a spear. Imagine sipping your lukewarm tea one moment, and the next, a jagged spear of iron erupting from the floorboards. It was a terrifying, and not altogether uncommon, hazard of the journey. You try to sleep, but the noise and the shaking make it impossible. You lie in your narrow berth, listening to the cacophony, feeling the grit of the prairie on your skin. You look out the window at the endless, dark expanse of land, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of a lonely campfire. The romance of the West is already beginning to feel like a poorly researched novel. You start to realize that the railroad, this great artery of progress, isn't a smooth ribbon of steel connecting to worlds. It's a brutal, noisy, and dirty intrusion into a vast and indifferent wilderness, and you're trapped inside it. Historians, by the way, are still debating the true nature of the railroad's legacy. Was it the great unifier that history books often portray, knitting the country together with commerce and communication, or was it, in practice, a more disruptive force, a tool for corporate exploitation that accelerated the displacement of native peoples and scarred the landscape for profit as you sit there, covered in soot, jostled and sleepless. You start to feel that the answer is probably a lot more complicated and a lot less heroic than the stories you were told. The train whistle blows, a long, mournful sound that seems to be swallowed by the immense emptiness outside. The train is beginning to slow. Up ahead, a few scattered lights twinkle in the pre-dawn gloom. This must be it. Your destination. The gateway to your grand western adventure. The train hisses to a halt with a final, shuddering sigh of steam and steel. The door to your car is pulled open, and you step out, expecting a solid platform. Instead, your polished leather shoe, the one you had shined just this morning, sinks an inch into something soft and yielding. You look down. It's not a platform, it's a series of splintered planks laid directly over a sea of mud. Welcome to town. A recent train has turned the main thoroughfare into a thick, brown soup, generously seasoned with horse manure and other unidentifiable refuse. The air, which you'd hoped would be crisp and clean, is a heavy blanket of wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint, sweet smell of decay. A porter, his face grim, hauls your luggage out behind you. Not a simple travel bag, but a magnificent, oversized trunk of Spanish leather with gleaming brass fittings. It lands on the muddy planks with a solid, expensive-sounding thud. Inside this trunk is your arsenal for conquering the West. You packed with meticulous care, envisioning evenings of sophisticated leisure after a day of you hadn't really thought that part through. You have 3 tailored wool suits, a dozen starched collar shirts, silk cravats, and a pair of patent leather evening shoes. There's a silver-backed grooming set, a crystal flask for your imported brandy, and several volumes of poetry bound in calfskin. You, a visionary, had imagined yourself as a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. Looking at your trunk now, sitting forlornly in the mud, you have your first inkling of just how wrong you were. The wool suits that felt so commanding in your Chicago club would be unbearable in the dry afternoon heat, yet insufficient for the shocking cold of the desert night. The silk cravats would be guarantees of sweat-soaked misery. And the starched white shirts, you might as well paint a target on your chest that says, "I am not from around here and have no useful skills." Every item in that trunk, chosen to project wealth and status, now seems like a liability. It's too heavy to carry easily, too conspicuous to leave unattended, and filled with things that are not only useless but actively detrimental to survival. This is where you learn a fundamental lesson about the West. Your bespoke, custom-tailored wardrobe is an anomaly. The real clothing of the frontier came from a book. This is your mainstream history lesson for the evening: the rise of the mail-order catalog. Companies like Montgomery Ward and, later, Sears, Roebuck & Co. were the Amazon of the 19th century. They sent their wish books to the most remote corners of the country, offering everything from flannel shirts and sturdy boots to windmills and entire prefabricated houses. Settlers didn't go to a tailor, they filled out an order form and waited weeks for a package to arrive on the very train you just exited. Your wealth was expressed in unique, finely crafted items. Theirs was expressed in durability and practicality, purchased from a shared, mass market source. As you stand there, contemplating the tragic uselessness of your wardrobe, you notice the men moving around the platform. They wear floppy hats, faded shirts of flannel or canvas, and heavy-duty trousers, often held up by suspenders. You see one man in particular, a miner by the looks of his soot-stained face, wearing trousers made of a strange, dark blue canvas reinforced with copper rivets at the corners of the pockets. They look coarse, uncomfortable, and utterly without style. You make a mental note of derision. And here's your weird little fact for the night: you're looking at the birth of an icon. Those are waist overalls, an invention by a San Francisco-based dry goods merchant named Levi Strauss. He realized that the miners of the gold rush needed pants that wouldn't fall apart, that riveted, denim and canvas creation was pure function over form, and it would go on to become one of the most enduring unpopular articles of clothing in the world, the blue jean. You, in your fine wool, are dressed for the past. He, in his work pants, is dressed for the future. This brings up a question that historians still chew on: how did the influx of mass-produced goods shape the social structure of the West? Did the Mail Order Catalog act as a great equalizer, allowing a farmer in Nebraska to own the same style of hat as a clerk in New York, thus blurring class lines? Or did it create new hierarchies, where status was determined by who could afford the good, better, or best quality items listed in the Sears catalog? Your very presence, with your trunk of European luxuries, throws this question into sharp relief. You thought your clothes would set you above everyone. Instead, they just set you apart, marking you as an outsider who doesn't understand the rules of this new world. Your immediate problem, however, is much more practical. How are you going to get this monstrously heavy trunk of useless finery from the train platform to the hotel, through a street that is currently a river of mud? The porter who unloaded it has already disappeared. You're alone with your wealth, and it feels less like a comfort and more like an anchor. You tentatively take one handle, your fine leather glove, immediately sinking into the grime. You pull. The trunk barely scrapes an inch, the sound of its beautiful leather bottom grinding against the splintered, muddy wood making you wince. This is going to be a long day. With a sigh of resignation and a silent apology to your tailor, you hoist a corner of your magnificent trunk. It's a Herculean effort. Your back complains, your palms, even through the gloves, scream in protest. You manage to drag it a few feet, the sound of scraping leather setting your teeth on edge. The mud, you realize, is not just mud. It's a primordial stew, a thick, sticky gumbo that clings to your shoes and the hem of your trousers with a possessive grip. Each step is a struggle, a suctioning pull, as if the earth itself is trying to reclaim your expensive footwear. You finally manage to get your trunk off the haphazard platform and onto what passes for a street. And what a street it is! It's not paved, not cobbled, not even properly graded. It's just a wide, muddy scar gouged between two rows of buildings. The buildings themselves are a jumble of raw, unpainted wood, many with false fronts, a peculiar architectural lie designed to make a one-story shack look like a grand, two-story establishment. It's a town built on haste and optimism, a movie set where the props are real, but haven't been given a finishing coat of paint. A wagon rumbles past, its wheels sinking nearly a foot into the mire, throwing up an arc of brown spray that you narrowly dodge. The driver, a man with a beard that seems to have its own ecosystem, gives you a look that is neither friendly nor unfriendly, but simply blank, as if you're a slightly unusual piece of landscape. There are no sidewalks, at least not in the way you understand them. Here and there, a few loose planks have been thrown down over the worst of the mud, but they wobble and tip precariously with every step. You feel like a contestant in a humiliating game show. This chaotic, muddy, and utterly functional scene is a classic representation of a boomtown. That's the mainstream history nugget for tonight. The rumor of gold, the arrival of the railroad, or the establishment of a cattle trailhead could transform an empty patch of prairie into a bustling hub of commerce in a matter of weeks. They were built for purpose, not for permanence or comfort. The raw, unfinished look wasn't a style choice, it was a reflection of the fact that the builders had more pressing concerns, like erecting a saloon or a blacksmith's shop, before the next wave of prospectors or cowboys arrived. Your presence here is a testament to that boom. You and your money are part of the reason this temporary-looking town even exists. As you stand there, trying to navigate this obstacle course, you notice a peculiar smell wafting from a nearby alley. It's the sharp, acrid scent of ammonia mixed with something earthy and vaguely sweet. You glance over and see a large pile of something. It's a mountain of dirt, hay, and what looks like animal bones. And here's a weird little fact for you: you might be looking at a pile of treasure. That heap could be a guano pile, the collected droppings from a nearby bat cave or bird rookery. In the late 19th century, before the invention of synthetic fertilizers, Guano was an incredibly valuable commodity, rich in nitrates and phosphates. It was white gold, mined and shipped back east to revitalize depleted farmlands. A whole industry existed around these smelly heaps. The West's wealth wasn't just in shiny metals, it was also in dirt bones. And yes, poop. The town might smell terrible, but that smell could be the very source of its prosperity. You manage to wrestle your trunk onto one of the wobbly planks, which immediately sags under the weight. You're trying to balance the trunk, your own body, and your rapidly evaporating dignity. You spot a building down the street with a sign that reads Grand Hotel Emporium. The word grand seems ambitious, to say the least, given its surroundings, but it's your only hope. You resume your clumsy, mud-spattered procession. This brings us to a debate that historians of the American West love to have. Were these frontier towns genuinely lawless zones of chaos and violence, as portrayed in countless films, or were they, in fact, remarkably orderly communities that quickly established their own forms of governance and social codes? The evidence is surprisingly mixed. Some towns were indeed brutal, dangerous places where life was cheap, but many others formed committees, elected sheriffs, and wrote down local ordinances with surprising speed. They were often more concerned with property disputes and fire prevention than with dramatic gunfights. The wildness of the Wild West is a concept that scholars are constantly reevaluating. As you stand in the middle of this muddy street, feeling completely out of your element, it certainly feels lawless and chaotic, but the truth is likely more nuanced. There's an order here, a logic to the madness. You just don't understand it yet. Your fine clothes, your Eastern sensibilities, none of them are the right currency here. The currency is resilience, adaptability, and a high tolerance for mud. And you're quickly discovering you're bankrupt in all three after a journey that feels more arduous than your entire cross-country train ride. You and your mud-caked trunk finally arrive at the entrance of the Grand Hotel Emporium. The word grand is painted in fancy, curling letters on a board that hangs slightly askew. The building itself is one of the larger structures in town, a full 2 stories of unpainted clapboard, boasting a long porch that offers a temporary refuge from the mud river of a main street. You heave the trunk up the 3 wooden steps, the effort leading you breathless and sweating through your expensive shirt. You push open the door. There is no liveried doorman, no bellhop rushing to assist you. The lobby is a single, large room that smells of stale beer, sawdust, and something you can only describe as old wood. To your left is the emporium part of the establishment, a long counter with shelves behind it, stocked with a bewildering array of goods: sacks of flour, pickaxes, canned peaches, coils of rope, and boxes of ammunition. To your right is a rough-hewn bar with a few men leaning against it, nursing glasses of murky-looking whiskey. They pause their conversation to turn and look at you, their gaze lingering on your fancy, albeit now filthy, attire. It's not a hostile look, more one of mild, anthropological curiosity, like you're a new species of bird that has just flown in. Straight ahead is a rickety desk, behind which sits a man whittling a piece of wood with a frighteningly large knife. He has a magnificent mustache and a weary expression. He looks up from his work, his eyes flicking from your face to your trunk, and then back again. He doesn't stand up. He doesn't smile. He just waits. "I'd like a room," you announce, trying to inject a note of authority into your voice. "Your finest room." The man points the tip of his knife towards a grimy ledger on the desk. "Name. You give your name," and he laboriously writes it down. His grip on the pen is delicate as a bear handling a teacup. "That'll be $2 in advance. $2 for a single night." For a single night. This is your mainstream history fact in the 1880 seconds. $2 was a significant amount of money. For a common laborer or a cowboy, that could be 2 full days' wages. It was an exorbitant price, a clear instance of supply and demand economics in a place with very few beds to offer. Your wealth means you don't flinch at the price, but it also marks you as someone who can and will be overcharged for everything. You place a shiny gold coin on the desk. The man's eyes briefly light up. He tests the coin with his teeth, a common practice to check if it was real gold or a lead fake before sweeping it into a wooden drawer and handing you a large iron key. Room 7th, upstairs, end of the hall. There is no offer to help with your trunk. You turn to face the staircase. It's steep, narrow, and creaks ominously with every footstep. The prospect of hauling your trunk up those stairs is genuinely daunting. This leads us to a little-known, quirky detail of Western hotels: the community bed. In many less grand establishments, you didn't pay for a room, you paid for a space. This could mean a spot on the floor, or more often a share of a massive bed, sometimes occupied by 2, 3, or even 4 complete strangers. The idea of a private room was a luxury. And even when you got one, the partitions between rooms were often just sheets of canvas or thin wooden planks, offering zero privacy. You could hear every cough, snore, and hushed conversation from your neighbors. The concept of personal space was as foreign as your silk cravat. Dragging, pushing, and half carrying your trunk, you finally make it to the top of the stairs and down the dim hallway to room 7th. You turn the key in the heavy lock. The door groans open, and you get your first look at your finest room. It's a small, bare box. The furniture consists of a narrow iron besta with a thin, lumpy mattress that looks like it's been in a fight and lost. There's a single wooden chair, a small washstand with a pitcher and a bowl, and one small window looking out over a fetid alleyway. There is no carpet, only bare, splintered floorboards. The air is stale and hot. A single fly buzzes lazily near the ceiling. This is the pinnacle of luxury in this town. Your $2 has bought you 4 walls and a door that locks. And this is where we touch on a persistent debate among social historians. What did comfort and luxury actually mean to people in the 19th century? Did they even have the same expectations as we do? Some argue that for people who were used to sleeping on the hard ground or in crowded, drafty log cabins, a room like this with a roof, a bed however lumpy, and a door was the very definition of opulence. Others contend that the human desire for comfort is universal, and that travelers of the era were keenly aware of and frequently complained about the primitive conditions they encountered. They wrote scathing letters and diary entries about the dirt, the bugs, and the bad food. Your own deep, visceral disappointment at the sight of room 7 suggests the latter might be closer to the truth. You thought your money could buy you a familiar standard of living. You are now learning, in a very tangible way, that it can't. You have only succeeded in buying the very best version of a hardship you didn't even know existed. You close the door, the sound echoing in the tiny, barren room. You are alone with your trunk, your filthy clothes, and the sinking feeling that this was a terrible, terrible idea. You stare at the lumpy mattress in your finest room and decide that dealing with your hunger is a more immediate priority than dealing with your exhaustion. A good meal, you think, a hearty steak and a glass of wine, will surely lift your spirits and restore some semblance of civilization. You splash some murky water from the pitcher onto your face. It's lukewarm and has a faint metallic taste, and head back down the creaking stairs. The combined lobby bar emporium is livelier now. A few more dusty-looking men have gathered at the bar, and a card game is underway at a corner table. The air is thicker with smoke and the low murmur of conversations. You approach the proprietor, who is now back to his whittling. I was told there was a dining room, you state, trying to sound hopeful. He jerks his thumb towards a doorway behind the bar. Through there, supper's on. You navigate past the drinkers and push through the swinging doors into the dining room. The grandeur continues. It's a small room with 3 long, communal tables covered in oilcloth that is sticky to the touch. The cutlery is a mismatched assortment of tin and iron, and the glasses are thick and cloudy. You are seated by a harried-looking woman who slams a plate and a fork down in front of you without a word. There is no menu. What's for supper? You ask the woman as she rushes past. She calls over her shoulder, "Beef." Your heart lifts. Beef, bay steak, the iconic meal of the West. You imagine a thick, juicy cut, seared on an open flame. You have read the stories of the great cattle drives, of the endless herds of longhorns. The beef here must be extraordinary. What arrives in front of you a few minutes later is not that. It's a slab of grayish-brown meat swimming in a pool of thin, greasy gravy. It's accompanied by a scoop of beans and a piece of bread so hard it could be used as a building material. You tentatively cut into the beef. It's tough, stringy, and has a slightly game-y flavor you can't quite identify. This is not the fresh, prime steer you were imagining. And here's a weird little historical fact that explains your culinary disappointment. Despite the West being synonymous with cattle ranching, the beef served in many small-town eateries was often of the lowest quality. The prime cuts were shipped back east on refrigerated rail cars to the lucrative markets of Chicago and New York. What remained for local consumption were often the older, tougher animals, or the meat was preserved in salt for so long that it lost most of its flavor and texture. What was served as beef wasn't beef at all. It could be bison or even prairie veal, which was a delicate euphemism for antelope. The steak on your plate has likely had a longer and more complicated journey than you have. You try the bread. It's hardtack, a simple, unleavened biscuit made of flour, water, and salt. It was prized not for its taste, but for its incredible shelf life. Baked properly, they could last for months, even years, making it a staple for soldiers, sailors, and pioneers. There were jokes that it was better to be shot than to be hit with a piece of hardtack. The common way to eat it was to soak it in coffee or gravy to make it chewable. You try soaking a corner in your greasy gravy, but only just. This miserable meal brings up a fascinating debate among food historians. What was the actual day-to-day diet of the average person on the frontier? Was it the hearty, protein-rich fare of myth, with pioneers feasting on buffalo and wild turkey, or was it a monotonous and nutritionally deficient diet, heavily reliant on a few preservable staples like salted meat, beans, cornmeal, and coffee? The evidence from diaries and store ledgers suggests the latter was far more common. Fresh fruits and vegetables were a rarity. Scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a constant threat. The romantic image of the campfire feast was the exception, not the rule. The reality was a daily struggle for calories, often with little regard for taste or nutrition. You chew the tough meat, your jaw aching with the effort. You look around the dining room. The other men are eating with a grim, focused efficiency, shoveling the food in without any sign of pleasure or complaint. This isn't a meal, it's refueling. They are not savoring the taste, they are consuming the energy needed to survive another day in this harsh place. You, with your refined palate and your dreams of a perfectly aged steak, have fundamentally misunderstood the purpose of food here. You push your plate away, your hunger replaced by a profound sense of disillusionment. You came seeking a taste of the authentic West, and you found it. It tastes like grease, salt, and disappointment. Leaving the sad remains of your beef dinner, you push back out into the main room of the hotel. The card game is more intense now, a small pile of coins in the center of the table. The bar, however, is where the real action is. It's crowded, noisy, and thick with the effigy of tobacco smoke and spilled alcohol. This, you think, is the iconic Western saloon you've seen in illustrations, the heart of the frontier town. You feel a pull of curiosity mixed with trepidation. In the stories, the saloon is a place of high drama, tense poker games decided by a hidden ace, sudden gunfights over a perceived insult. You picture swinging doors, a piano player banging out a jaunty tune, and a grizzled bartender sliding a shot of whiskey down the bar. You decide that a glass of your preferred brandy might wash away the lingering taste of your dinner. You walk up to the bar, finding a small space to squeeze in. The reality, as usual, is less glamorous. There are no swinging doors, just the main entrance to the hotel. There is no piano player, only the cacophony of loud, slurred conversations. And the bartender, the same man from the front desk, is not grizzled, he's just overworked. He's wiping the stained countertop with a rag that looks like it has seen better decades. "Hey Brandy," you say, projecting your voice over the din. "The best you have." He gives you a flat look and plunks a grimy glass in front of you. He then grabs an unmarked bottle from the shelf and pours a generous amount of amber liquid into it. The smell that hits your nose is sharp and dry, more like industrial solvent than fine French spirits. You take a cautious sip. It burns. It's a raw, fiery heat that scorches your throat and makes your eyes water. This is not brandy. This is 40 rod whiskey, so named because it was said you couldn't walk more than 40 rods, about 200 meters, after drinking it before you collapsed. This brings us to our mainstream history lesson for the night. The saloon was far more than just a drinking hole. In a town with few public buildings, it served as an all-purpose community center. It was a place to get the news, to conduct business, to find work, to gamble, and simply to escape the loneliness and hardship of frontier life. For many single men, miners, cowboys, laborers, the saloon was the closest thing they had to a living room. It was the social, political, and economic hub of the community, which is why even the smallest towns usually had at least one, and often several. But what they were drinking in these establishments is where the weird facts come in. The whiskey served was often a vile concoction. Unscrupulous suppliers would take a barrel of cheap grain alcohol and rectify it by adding things to stretch and give it color and kick. Common additives included burnt sugar for color, tobacco spit for a darker hue, and even strychnine or gunpowder for an extra bite. Your glass of brandy is likely a cocktail of cheap alcohol and chemical trickery, a far cry from the aged, unregulated spirits you're used to. It wasn't about savoring a complex flavor profile. It was about achieving intoxication as quickly and cheaply as possible. You put the glass down, your throat still tingling unpleasantly. You look around at the patrons. They aren't stoic, silent gunslingers. They are loud, boisterous, and often desperately lonely men. They are telling tall tales, arguing about politics back east, and complaining about the price of supplies. You overhear snippets of conversation, a dispute over a mining claim, news of a cattle stampede, a debate about the newfangled barbed wire. This isn't the prelude to a shootout, it's the 19th century equivalent of a sports bar on a Tuesday night. This observation connects to a long-standing debate among historians about the nature of violence in the West. Was the saloon the primary stage for the legendary gunfights of frontier lore? The answer is a surprising not really. While violence certainly occurred, historical records show that the most famous wild towns, like Dodge City or Tombstone, had surprisingly strict gun control laws. You were often required to check your firearms at the sheriff's office or with the bartender upon entering town limits. The idea of everyone walking around armed to the teeth and ready to draw at a moment's notice is largely a Hollywood invention. The real danger in a saloon wasn't a duel at high noon. It was a drunken brawl, a knife pulled in a moment of anger, or simply the long-term health effects of drinking the poisonous while being served. Historians argue that the myth of the saloon gunfight was more powerful and enduring than the reality. The stories were exaggerated and romanticized, creating a legend that has overshadowed the more mundane truth. You realize you don't belong here. Your quiet, solitary sipping of an aged spirit is a world away from this raw, communal need for oblivion. You are an observer, a tourist in a land of participants. Your wealth can buy you a glass of the local poison, but it can't buy you entry into the camaraderie, however rough, that fills this room. It can't buy you an understanding of the jokes, the grievances that bind these men together. You turn away from the bar, leaving your glass of 40-rod whiskey untouched. You need some air, but more than that, you need a drink of water. A simple, clean glass of water. Surely, that can't be too much to ask. Leaving the suffocating atmosphere of the saloon, you step back out onto the hotel porch. The evening air has a slight chill to it, a welcome relief from the stuffy room. Your throat still feels raw from that single, ill-advised sip of brandy, and your primary desire now is for something simple and pure, a drink of water. You remember the pitcher and bowl in your room, but the metallic taste of that water still lingers in your memory. You need something fresh. Back in your room, you consider your options. The water in the pitcher is your only immediate source. You pour some into the cloudy glass. In the dim light from the hallway, you can see tiny specks floating in it. You swirl it around, and a fine silt settles at the bottom. This is not the filtered, pristine water you take for granted. This is water that has been hauled in a barrel from the nearest river or pumped from a shallow, hand-dug well. This is your mainstream history point for the night. Access to clean water was one of the single greatest challenges of life in the 19th century West. Towns were often established for reasons of commerce or resources. A mine, a railroad junction with little thought given to a reliable water source. The rivers were often contaminated by upstream mining operations, which leached heavy metals like mercury and arsenic into the water. They were also contaminated by animal and human waste. Wells were often shallow and easily fouled by runoff from the muddy streets and the local livery stable. As a result, waterborne diseases were rampant. You decide against drinking from the pitcher. Perhaps you can buy some cleaner water downstairs. You head back to the emporium section of the lobby, where the proprietor is now tallying his accounts in the ledger. "Excuse me," you say. "I'd like to purchase some drinking water. Bottled if you have it." He looks up at you as if you've just asked for a winged horse. He lets out a short, dry laugh. "Bottled water," he shakes his head. "Son, we got two kinds of water here. The stuff from the well out back, or the stuff from the river. The pitcher in your room is from the well. We figure it's got less horse in it." His casual mention of horse in the water is not a joke. And this brings us to a strange and fascinating detail about frontier life: the water wagon. In many towns, enterprising individuals would make a living by hauling barrels of water from a source that was perceived to be cleaner, perhaps a spring several miles away, and selling it door to door. This water was a premium product, and you paid by the bucket. However, the business was entirely unregulated. The vendor's claims of a pure mountain spring could be a complete fabrication. He might just be pulling it from a different part of the same contaminated river. You paid your money and took your chances. The proprietor's response makes it clear there's no such service here, or at least none that he deals in. Your options are the well or the river. You think about the science, you know. Boiling the water would kill the bacteria. It's a simple, effective solution. "Do you have a way I could boil some water?" you ask. "I have my own." You trail off, realizing how absurd it would sound to say travel kettle. He squints at you. "Boil it what for? It's wet, ain't it?" His reaction highlights a critical gap in understanding. While the germ theory of disease was being developed and discussed in the scientific communities of Europe and the eastern United States during this period, that knowledge had not trickled down to the general populace, especially not on the remote frontier. This is where a major historical debate comes in. When did germ theory actually start to change public behavior? Historians argue about the timeline. Some point to major public health campaigns in big cities in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Others argue that for most people in rural and frontier areas, the old ways of thinking persisted for decades. Sickness was often attributed to bad air, miasma, an imbalance of the humors, or simply God's will. The idea that invisible germs in the water could kill you would have sounded like superstitious nonsense to many. To the man behind the counter, your request to boil water isn't a sign of scientific sophistication. It's a sign of bizarre, unfounded paranoia. You are the crazy one, not him. He is living by the rules of his world, and you are trying to apply the rules of a world that doesn't exist here yet. Defeated, you return to your room. You are faced with a terrible choice. You can drink the silty, possibly contaminated water and risk contracting typhoid, cholera, or dysentery, diseases that were often a death sentence in a place without proper medical care. Or you can remain thirsty dehydrating yourself in the dry air of the high plains. Your immense wealth is utterly useless. You can't buy a bottle of Evian. You can't summon a filtration system. Your 21st century knowledge has identified the problem with perfect clarity, but your 19th century reality offers no viable solution. You look at the pitcher, then at your empty glass. For the first time, you feel a genuine, primal fear. It's not a fear of outlaws or gunfights. It's the fear of a simple glass of water. In this moment, the West's most dangerous weapon isn't a Colt 45th, it's a micro. You ultimately decide that dehydration is the more immediate threat and take a few tentative sips of the well water from your pitcher. It tastes of dust and minerals, and you try very hard not to think about the hotel owner's comment about its equine contents. You survive the drink, but the experience leaves you feeling grimy and unsettled. A bath, you think. A hot bath would be the perfect antidote. It would wash away the trail dust, the coal soot, and the general feeling of filth that has enveloped you since your arrival. You go back downstairs, now feeling like a high-maintenance nuisance, and find the proprietor again. "I would like to arrange for a bath," you say, trying to make it sound as matter-of-fact as possible. He sighs, puts down his whittling knife, and looks at you with an expression of profound weariness. "A bath?" he repeats, not as a question, but as a statement of disbelief. "All right. It'll cost you another $1. $1. Half the price of the room just to wash." Again, you just nod. This price inflation is your mainstream history fact for the evening. In the West, things weren't priced based on their intrinsic value, but on the labor required to produce them. A bath wasn't just a matter of turning a tap. It was a laborious, time-consuming process. Water had to be hauled from the well or river bucket by bucket. It had to be heated over a fire, which meant chopping or purchasing wood. Then, the heavy, hot water had to be carried to the tub. The whole process could take an hour or more of hard work for a single bath, so the high price reflected the manual labor involved. "Give me 30 minutes, the proprietor grunts and disappears through a back door. You wait, and eventually he calls for you. He leads you not to a private, tiled bathroom, but to a small, drafty shed attached to the back of the hotel. Inside, standing in the middle of the dirt floor, is a large metal hip tub. Steam rises from the water it contains. The room is dimly lit by a single kerosene lamp, then the air is damp and chilly. He gestures to the tub and a thin, coarse towel hanging on a nail. "Don't take all night. And don't splash too much." He leaves, closing the door behind him. You are alone with your bath. The water looks inviting, but as you dip a hand in, you realize it's scaldingly hot in some places and lukewarm in others. It has been stirred. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you notice something else. The water is not clean. It has a grayish tinge, and a faint ring of scum is visible on the inside of the tub from a previous user. And here we arrive at a truly quirky and slightly disgusting fact of 19th century life: the family bath. In many homes, and even in some hotels, bathwater was a shared resource. To save on the labor of hauling and heating, an entire family would use the same tub of water. The father would go first, followed by the other men, then the mother, then the children, and finally the baby. By the end, the water would be a veritable soup. In a hotel setting, fresh water might simply mean that only 1 or 2 people had used it before you. Your dollar might not have paid for clean water, but merely for hot water. You stand there in the cold shed, looking at the scummy water, and you face another dilemma. Do you get in? The very idea is repellent to your modern sensibilities, but you've paid $1, and the grime on your own skin feels just as repulsive. This dilemma touches on a debate that still circulates among historians and archaeologists of the period. Just how clean were people in the Old West? The popular image is one of grimy, unwashed cowboys who went months without bathing. There is some truth to that. Bathing was infrequent and often seen as an unnecessary, even unhealthy, indulgence. Some believed that it washed away a protective layer of oil from the skin, leaving one susceptible to illness. Doctors of the era sometimes advised against frequent bathing, especially in the cold winter months, fearing it could lead to pneumonia. However, other evidence suggests that people did the best they could with the resources available. They took sponge baths, using the pitcher and bowl in their rooms. They washed their hands and faces daily. Cleanliness was associated with respectability and guidelines, even on the frontier. The reality was likely somewhere in the middle. People were probably cleaner than the grim-eyed myths suggest, but far dirtier than our modern standards would find acceptable. Their concept of clean was simply different from ours. Shaped by the harsh constraints of their environment, you decide to compromise. You'll use the water, but only for a quick, standing wash, avoiding full immersion. You strip off your filthy clothes and gingerly step into the tub. The metal is cold against your feet. You use the small piece of harsh, light heavy soap provided and quickly scrub yourself down, trying to ignore the lukewarm, grayish water splashing around your ankles. You are, for a moment, technically cleaner, but you don't feel refreshed. You feel exposed, cold, and more aware than ever of the vast gulf between your expectations and this place's reality. As you dry off with the towel, which feels more like a piece of burlap, you realize that even the simple act of getting clean in the Old West is a complicated, unpleasant, and expensive chore. You came seeking comfort and found only another layer of hardship. You emerge from the bathing shed feeling marginally cleaner but profoundly chilled. As you climb the stairs back to your room, a tickle starts in your throat. You try to clear it with a small cough. Then comes another deeper one. A shiver runs through you that has nothing to do with the cold. Your nose is beginning to run. Oh no. After a day of dirt, bad food, and stress, your 21st century immune system, coddled by sterile environments and readily available medicine, is starting to buckle. You're catching a cold. Back in your room, you rummage through your trunk. Tucked away in a small leather pouch are your personal remedies: aspirin, cough drops, some vitamin C tablets, maybe even a packet of cold and flu powder. You find the pouch, but a sense of dread washes over you as you realize the truth. These things don't exist yet. Aspirin won't be commercially produced by Bayer for another decade or so. Vitamin C hasn't even been discovered. Your modern medical kit is useless anachronism, one of the most trivial ailments of your time, and you have no way to treat its symptoms. By morning, it's worse. Your head is pounding, your throat feels like sandpaper, and you're aching all over. This isn't just a nuisance, it's a problem. A simple cold can weaken the body and pave the way for more serious secondary infections like pneumonia or bronchitis, which were major killers in the 19th century. Your wealth, which you thought could solve any problem, suddenly seems very small in the face of your own biology. You decide you must seek medical help. You ask the hotel proprietor where you can find the town doctor. He directs you to a small shack at the edge of town with a shingle that simply reads Drive. J. Abernathy, physician surgeon. The doctor's office is a single, cluttered room that smells of whiskey and herbal concoctions. Books are piled in dusty stacks, and strange-looking medical instruments are laid out on a side table. Doctor. Abernathy himself is a portly man with kind eyes and a shirt stained with what you hope is not blood. This is your mainstream history fact of the night. Medical standards on the frontier were wildly inconsistent. Anyone could call themselves a doctor. There was no standardized licensing or board certification as we know it today. Some doctors were highly educated and trained in the medical schools of the East or Europe. Many others were apprentices who had learned their trade by observation. Then a significant number were outright charlatans, traveling from town to town, selling patent medicines and preying on the sick and desperate. You had no real way of knowing which kind you were dealing with. You describe your symptoms: the headache, the cough, the aches and pains. The doctor listens patiently, nodding. He then proceeds with his examination. He doesn't take your temperature. With a thermometer, he just places a hand on your forehead. He doesn't listen to your lungs with a stethoscope, he just puts his ear directly against your chest. A startlingly intimate gesture. After his examination, he straightens up and declares his diagnosis. You've got a touch of the grip, he says, using the common term for influenza or a bad cold. A disturbance in your humors. We'll need to rebalance them. He turns to his shelves, which are lined with dozens of glass jars containing herbs, powders, and strange-looking liquids. This is where we get into the weird and wonderful world of 19th century medicine. He mixes a dark, syrupy liquid into a bottle. This is a tincture of harehound and cherry bark for the cough, he explains. Then he pulls out another bottle. And this is a calomel purge. We need to get the bad humors out. Calomel was a compound containing mercury chloride, causing intense vomiting and diarrhea. It was a cornerstone of heroic medicine, the belief that aggressive treatments were needed to shock the body back into health. Unfortunately, it was also a toxic poison that could cause tooth loss, neurological damage, and kidney failure. And this connects to a major, ongoing debate among medical historians. Was 19th century medicine more helpful or harmful? It's a genuinely tough question. On one hand, doctors of the era, it did set broken bones, stitch wounds, and deliver babies, often with great skill under terrible conditions. On the other hand, many of their most common treatments, like bloodletting, blistering, and mercury-based purges, were actively harmful and likely killed more patients than they saved. The germ theory was still fighting for acceptance, so antiseptic practices were rare. A doctor might go directly from an autopsy to delivering a baby without washing his hands, unknowingly spreading deadly infections. The very person you turn to for help could be your greatest danger. You look at the bottle of mercury-laced purgative he is offering you. Your 21st century brain is screaming poison. You know that the best thing for your cold is rest, hydration, and letting your immune system do its job. But how do you explain that to him? How do you refuse the prescribed treatment without causing mortal offense to the only medical practitioner for 100 miles? Your wealth is irrelevant. Your knowledge is a curse, making you aware of a danger you are powerless to articulate. You can't just say, I'll be fine. I just need some chicken soup and a Netflix binge. You are trapped in a medical nightmare where the cure is demonstrably worse than the disease. You paid for a consultation, and you've received a prescription for poison. You managed to politely decline the calomel purge, muttering something about a weak stomach. But you pay the doctor for his time and accept the bottle of cough syrup, which you have no intention of drinking. You leave his office feeling sicker than when you went in, not from the cold, but from the chilling realization of your own vulnerability. You retreat to your lumpy hotel bed, your body aching, and pull the thin blanket up to your chin. Lying there, you start to think about the one thing that has always given you a sense of security: your money. In your world, wealth is a shield. It buys the best security systems, the best legal advice, the best health care. Here, it seems to be doing the opposite. It's making you a target. Your fine clothes, your heavy trunk, the gold coin you used to pay the hotelier, every signal of your wealth has been noted. You don't feel secure, you feel like a prize pig at a county fair. You decide to take stock of your assets. You open your large trunk and then a smaller, locked cash box inside. It's full of gold coins, double eagles and eagles, and a thick stack of crisp banknotes from a reputable Chicago bank. It's a fortune, enough to buy this entire dusty town several times over. As you run your fingers over the cool metal and crisp paper, a noise from the hallway makes you freeze. You quickly and quietly close the box, your heart pounding. The sound of footsteps recedes, but the fear remains. Anyone could have seen you arrive. Anyone could have heard the hotelier's gasp when you paid with gold. In a place where a man might work all day for $1, the contents of your box are an unimaginable temptation. This is your mainstream history fact for the night, while gold and silver coins especially were the preferred currency. The American West had a complex and often chaotic monetary system. There was a shortage of hard currency, so people used whatever they could. This included banknotes from various state and private banks of varying reliability, greenbacks issued by the federal government, and even in some places, scrip issued by a local company or large ranch redeemable only at the company store. Your pile of solid gold and reliable banknotes makes you not just rich, but an island of financial stability in a sea of uncertainty. Feeling a new sense of paranoia, you try to find a place to hide your cash box. Under the flimsy bed too obvious, in the empty fireplace too cliché. There are no good options. This leads to a weird and little-known aspect of life in the 19th century, the money belt. This wasn't just a trope from the movies, it was a very real and essential accessory for anyone carrying a significant sum of cash. It was a simple canvas or leather belt with hidden, zippered, or button compartments, worn under the shirt directly against the skin. It was uncomfortable, sweaty, and inconvenient, but it was the safest way to transport your wealth. You, in your sophisticated innocence, packed a cash box. The seasoned traveler would have sewn his fortune into his underwear. Your paranoia is not unfounded. While the West wasn't the non-stop shootout of popular legend, property crime was a serious and constant concern. Robbery, theft, and claim jumping were far more common than duels at high noon. And this is where historians have a lively debate who were the real threats in the Old West. Was it the famous, headline-grabbing outlaws like Jesse James or Billy the Kid, or was it the more mundane, anonymous criminals, the desperate drifter, the crooked gambler, the fellow prospector who decided it was easier to steal your gold than to find his own? The historical record suggests the latter. The famous outlaws were exceptions, responsible for a tiny fraction of the overall crime. The real danger came from the ordinary people around you, driven by desperation or simple opportunism. The man who just sold you a fake cough syrup, the men you saw at the bar, the proprietor of the hotel, any one of them could be a potential threat. You decide the trunk is too conspicuous. You take a portion of the money, a few gold coins and a small wad of bills, and stuff it deep into your trouser pockets. You then relic the cash box in the trunk, hoping that out of sight is out of mind. But now a new problem arises. How do you pay for anything without revealing your wealth? If you pull out a $20 gold piece to pay for a 50-cent item, you're not just overpaying, you're advertising. You're telling everyone, I have more of these. You need small change, but you have none. You can't just break a 20 at the local coffee shop. The very act of making a simple transaction is now fraught with strategic peril. You lie back down, your head throbbing from your cold and your anxiety. Your money, your greatest asset, has become your greatest burden. It can't buy you health. It can't buy you safety. It can't even be used easily without endangering you further. It's a beacon, attracting the kind of attention you absolutely do not want. You thought your money made you powerful. Here, it just makes you heavy, slow, and delicious looking to the predators of the human ecosystem. Your fitful, feverish sleep is shattered by a loud banging on your door. It's not the gentle rap of a hotel servant, but a heavy, insistent pounding. Open up, town marshal. A voice bellows from the hallway. Your heart leaps into your throat. The marshal, what could he possibly want with you? Your mind races through a list of potential crimes. Did the doctor report you for refusing his mercury treatment? Is having a large sum of money a crime in itself? You stumble out of bed, your body aching, and unlock the door. Standing in the hallway is a large man with a walrus mustache and a tarnished silver star pinned to his vest. He isn't the tall, lean, steely-eyed hero of dime novels. He's middle-aged, slightly punchy, and his expression is one of weary authority. He looks you up and down, his eyes taking in your rumpled state and the relative luxury of your travel clothes. You the fella who arrived on the train yesterday? He asks, his voice a low grumble. The one with the fancy trunk. You nod, your throat too dry to speak. There's been a complaint, he says, getting straight to the point. Man says you paid him with a counterfeit gold piece. You stare at him dumbfounded. Counterfeit? It was a freshly minted double eagle from a Chicago bank. That's impossible. you managed to croak. It was a real gold coin. That's what they all say, the marshal says, unimpressed. The assayer tested it. Says it's a lead slug with a gold wash. A common enough cheat. He gestures down the stairs. You're gonna have to come with me. This is your mainstream history fact for the night. The role of the town marshal or sheriff in the West was often far more complicated than simply keeping the peace. They were jacks of all trades. They served as tax collectors, dog catchers, inspectors of weights and measures, and enforcers of local ordinances that could be as trivial as a fine for spitting on the boardwalk. They were often elected officials, meaning they had to keep the local populace, especially the influential business owners, happy. Their job wasn't always about justice, it was often about maintaining the town's economic stability. You're being escorted down the stairs and out into the muddy street. The hotel proprietor, the very man you paid with the supposedly fake coin, is standing on the porch, watching you with a smug look on his face. It hits you with the force of a physical blow. This is a scam. A classic shakedown. He took your real gold coin, swapped it for a fake one he had ready, and then called the marshal. And here's a weird, unsettling fact about frontier law: the burden of proof was often flexible. In the absence of a modern forensic system, justice often relied on reputation, witness testimony, which could be easily bought or coerced, and the simple gut feeling of the presiding official. An assayer, a person who tests the purity of metals, could be in on the scam. In a dispute between a respected local business owner and a wealthy, suspicious-looking outsider, who was the marshal more likely to believe your word against his, you're taken to a small wooden building that serves as the marshal's office in the town jail, which consists of 2 iron-barred cells at the back. The marshal sits you down and listens, with feigned patience, as you try to explain that you're a man of wealth and standing, that the coin was real, that this is all a terrible mistake. He lets you finish and then leans back in his chair. Look, son, he says, in a tone that's almost paternal, here's how this is gonna go. We can hold a hearing. We'll get the judge. That'll take a few days for him to ride in from the county seat. In the meantime, you'll be a guest in my fine establishment here. He jerks a thumb toward the grim-looking cells. Or he continues, leaning forward, you can just make this right. Pay a fine for passing false currency, and for the trouble you've caused. Let's say $100. In real money, this time. Then this all goes away. You're free to go. This brings us to a contentious historical debate. Was frontier justice fundamentally fair? Or was it a system ripe for corruption? Many historians argue that, given the circumstances, the system worked surprisingly well. It was swift, practical, and established a necessary order in a chaotic environment. Others argue that it was often a tool of the powerful, used to enforce social hierarchies and fleece newcomers. They point to countless examples of legal chicanery, where the law was twisted to serve the interests of the local elite. Your current situation is a perfect case study for the latter argument. The law isn't protecting you, it's being used as a weapon against you. The marshal isn't an impartial arbiter of justice, he's the collection agent in a well-oiled extortion scheme. You are sick, exhausted, and completely trapped. You could protest, demand a trial, and assert your rights. But the thought of spending even one night in that filthy cell, let alone several days, is unbearable. Your wealth has not only failed to protect you, it has made you the target of a conspiracy. The very people tasked with upholding the law are the ones fleecing you. You reach into your pocket, your hand trembling with a mixture of fever and rage, and pull out your wad of banknotes. You count out $100 and place it on the marshal's desk. He scoops it up without a word. Pleasure doing business with you, he says. Now get out of my office, and I'd be careful if I were you. This town has a way of finding trouble for folks who don't belong. You stumble out of the marshal's office, $100 poor and infinitely more cynical. The raw morning sun glints off the muddy street, making you squint. Your head pounds. The world feels tilted, unreal. You just got legally robbed by the law itself. The marshal's parting words. This town has a way of finding trouble for folks who don't belong, echo in your ears. It wasn't advice, it was a threat. You start walking, not back to the hotel, but just away. You need to clear your head. You wander down the main street, past the saloon, the blacksmith, and the general store. The town is fully awake now. Men on horseback clop through the mud, wagons creak under the weight of supplies, and the sound of a hammer on an anvil rings out with rhythmic clarity. You are an invisible ghost in their world, your internal turmoil, completely at odds with the town's industrious hum. You decide to try and be friendly to break your isolation. You see a man leaning against a post, rolling a cigarette. He looks approachable enough. You walk over, mustering a weak smile. "Good morning," you say. The man finishes rolling his cigarette, licks the paper, and sticks it in his mouth. He looks you over. A slow, deliberate appraisal from your mud-stained shoes to your wilted collar. He doesn't return your smile. He simply grunts, a non-committal sound in the back of his throat, and lights his cigarette, turning his gaze back to the street as if you are no longer there. The rejection, though small, stings. You try again. A few women are gathered outside the emporium, talking amongst themselves. You tip your hat, the gesture of politeness you've performed 1,000 times back home. "Ladies," you say. They stop their conversation, give you a brief, startled look, and then quickly turn away, resuming their talk in hushed tones. You've been dismissed again. This is your mainstream history lesson. For the night, social etiquette on the frontier was a complex and unwritten code. While Eastern cities had rigid rules of formal introduction and social calls, the West operated on a different system, one built on observation and earned trust. A stranger, especially one who looked and dressed as you do, was an unknown quantity. Friendliness wasn't assumed, it was a privilege to be granted after a period of cautious assessment. Your attempts at immediate familiarity are not seen as charming, they are seen as strange, possibly suspicious. You're breaking rules you don't even know exist. Your failed attempts at connection lead you to a strange and specific piece of Western social dynamics, the concept of seeing the elephant. This was a popular 19th century phrase that meant experiencing the wider world, facing hardships, and gaining a kind of weary wisdom. It was often used by soldiers, gold rush prospectors, and pioneers. Someone who had seen the elephant had been tested by the frontier and survived. They shared a common understanding, a kind of veteran status. You, with your soft hands and your fancy luggage, have clearly not seen the elephant. Your attempts to casually interact with people who have is like a tourist trying to join a conversation among combat veterans. You don't share their language, their scars, or their worldview. Your politeness is an alien dialect. As you continue your aimless walk, you notice the subtle ways people communicate without words. A slight nod between two men passing on the street. The way a rancher instinctively steps aside to let a laden wagon pass. A shared glance between two miners that communicates a whole conversation. There is a deep, nonverbal grammar at play here, and you are illiterate. This illiteracy brings up a question that social historians of the West frequently ponder: how much silent-type cowboy archetype was a personality trait, and how much was a necessary survival mechanism. Was the famous Western reticence a sign of stoic self-reliance? Or was it a practical defense in an environment where saying the wrong thing to the wrong person could have fatal consequences in a world of shifting allegiances, claim disputes, and old grudges? Silence was often the safest strategy. A talkative man was a man who might reveal too much, ask the wrong questions, or inadvertently cause offense. The laconic, tight-lipped cowboy of myth might not have been silent because he was tough, but because he was smart. Your own fumbling, garrulous attempts to be friendly are, in this context, the actions of a fool. You find yourself at the edge of town, near the corrals. The smell of high-end livestock is strong. A group of cowboys are expertly separating cattle, their movements fluid and economical. They communicate with shouts and whistles, a language perfectly suited to their task. They work together as a seamless unit, a band of brothers forged by shared work and shared danger. You watch them, an outsider looking in on a world with its own intricate social machinery. You came to the West with a fortune in your pocket, thinking you could buy your way into the experience. But you're learning that the real currency here isn't gold. It's trust. It's shared experience. It's the quiet understanding of having seen the elephant. And you have none of it. You are utterly, completely alone. As you turn away from the corals, feeling the full weight of your isolation, you start to notice something else. Or rather, a lack of something. Where are all the women and children? You've seen a few. Like the ladies who snubbed you outside the emporium and the harried server in the hotel dining room. But for a town of this size, the streets are overwhelmingly male. The population seems to consist almost entirely of miners, cowboys, merchants, and drifters. It feels like a massive, dusty fraternity house. You wander away from the main thoroughfare, down a smaller side street where the buildings look more like actual homes than storefronts. Here, you start to see them. A woman is vigorously beating a rug on a clothesline. Two small children are playing in the dirt with sticks, their laughter a stark contrast to the gruff male voices that dominate the town. A mother calls her children in from a doorway, her eyes flicking towards you, the stranger, for a brief or a moment before she disappears back inside. This is your mainstream historical fact. The demographics of the American frontier were incredibly skewed. In the early stages of a town's development, especially in mining camps or cattle towns, men vastly outnumbered women, sometimes by a ratio of 10-1, or even higher. The respectable woman, the wife, the mother, the school teacher was a rare and highly valued presence. Their arrival in significant numbers often unsignaled a town's transition from a temporary, chaotic camp to a more stable, permanent community. Your observation of a male-dominated public sphere and a more hidden domestic sphere is a classic snapshot of a town in that very transition. As you walk down this quieter street, you see a small, neatly kept house with a small garden out front, a defiant patch of green in a world of brown. A woman is tending to it. She is not the glamorous saloon girl of fiction, nor the sun-hardened, careworn pioneer mother of photographs. She is just a woman, dressed in a simple but clean calico dress, trying to coax life from the dry soil. You feel an urge to talk to her, to ask her what her life is like. But the memory of your previous rejections, and the protective way she glanced at her own home, keeps you at a distance. This brings us to a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of Western life, the civilizing role attributed to women. The common narrative, both then and now, was that women brought with them the institutions of settled society, schools, churches, families, and a demand for law and order. They were seen as the moral compass of the community, the force that would tame the wild excesses of the frontier men. While there's some truth to this, it's a narrative that many historians now find overly simplistic. This is where the historical debate lies. Were women really the passive civilized RS of the West, or were they active agents in their own right, shaping their environment in complex and diverse ways? The traditional view often renders these women invisible, defining them only by their relationship to men, as wives and mothers and their supposed moral function. But recent scholarship has worked hard to uncover the varied realities of women's lives. They were not a monolithic block. They were homesteaders running their own farms, entrepreneurs operating boarding houses and laundries, teachers, writers, and doctors. Some women thrived on the independence and opportunity the West offered, while others endured lives of crushing loneliness and hardship. They were as diverse in their experiences and motivations as the men were. The woman in the garden is not just a symbol of civilization. She is an individual carving out her own existence in a difficult world. You also notice the absence of older children. The ones you saw were very young. This hints at another harsh reality. Where are the schools in a new, unorganized town like this? Formal education was a low priority. Children were often put to work as soon as they were able, contributing to the family's survival. A school might be nothing more than a single room with a handful of students of all ages, taught by one poorly paid teacher with few books or supplies. For many children on the frontier, a full education was a luxury their families simply couldn't afford. The idea of a structured childhood, with years dedicated to school and play, is a modern concept. Here, childhood was a brief apprenticeship for a life of hard labor. You turn back towards the main street, feeling like you've had a glimpse behind a curtain. The public face of the town, the saloon, the marshal, the commerce is a man's world. But its future, its potential for permanence, is quietly being built in these back streets, in the gardens, the homes, and the lives of the women and children you barely see. Your money gives you access to the town's noisy, chaotic front room, the world of men and transactions, but it grants you no access to this other, quieter world. You are excluded from the rough camaraderie of the cowboys and equally excluded from the nascent domestic sphere that might one day make this place a real community. You are adrift in the space between, belonging to neither. Dejected and feeling more like an alien than a visitor, you find your way back to the Emporium. The failed social experiments and the brush with the law have left you feeling defeated. A new, perhaps foolish, idea begins to form in your mind. If you can't join them, maybe you can buy your way in. What if you weren't just a transient with a heavy trunk? What if you were a landowner, a man with a stake in the community? The idea feels solid, tangible. Property. That's a language everyone understands. You approach the proprietor, who is now lounging behind his counter, looking smug after his successful extortion of you. You decide to ignore the past for the sake of the future. I'm interested in purchasing some land, you announce, your voice steadier than you feel. A plot in town, perhaps, or a nice parcel just outside. The proprietor's eyes, which were easy and indifferent a moment ago, sharpen with a new kind of interest. The interest of a predator who sees a particularly slow and foolish rabbit wander back into its territory. He smiles, a greasy, welcoming smile this time. A man of vision, he exclaims, "I like that. Yes, sir, you've come to the right place. As it happens, I am the agent for the railroad's land office. We have some prime parcels available." This is your mainstream history fact for the night. The railroads were the largest private landowners in the American West, as an incentive to build the transcontinental lines. The U.S. government granted them massive tracts of land, typically in a checkerboard pattern of square-mile sections along their routes. The railroads then sold this land to settlers, speculators, and town developers to finance their operations and create customers along their lines. The man behind the counter might be a liar and a cheat, but his claim to be an agent is entirely plausible. He is the gatekeeper to the region's most valuable real estate. He pulls out a large, hand-drawn map and spreads it on the counter. It shows the town and the surrounding countryside, neatly divided into squares and rectangles. This here, he says, tapping a square right on the edge of town, is a prime commercial lot, perfect for a new hotel. And this, he gestures to a larger rectangle a bit further out, a beautiful piece of ranch land. Got a creek running right through it. Good water. His sales pitch is smooth and convincing. You, a man accustomed to complex urban real estate deals, feel a surge of confidence. This is a world you understand. Contracts, deeds, property lines. You point to the parcel with the supposed creek. How much for that one? He names a price that seems ridiculously low to you, accustomed as you are to city prices. It's a significant sum for this place, but well within your means. You feel a thrill of excitement. This is it. This is how you establish yourself. But here is where you run into a very weird and treacherous fact of Western land acquisition. The titles were often a complete mess. The same piece of land could have multiple, conflicting claims on it. The railroad might claim it as part of their grant. A homesteader might claim it under the Homestead Act, which gave land to settlers who improved it. A speculator might have an older, dubious claim from a Spanish or Mexican land grant. The Native American tribes who had lived there for centuries had a claim that predated all of them, though it was rarely recognized by the U.S. government. The map in front of you is a neat, tidy lie imposed on a chaotic reality. You agree to the price. The proprietor draws up a deed on a preprinted form, filling in the details of the parcel. You hand over the money carefully, using smaller bills this time, and he gives you the deed. You hold it in your hand. It feels official. It feels real. You are now a landowner. This transaction places you squarely in the middle of a major historical debate. What was the true impact of federal land policies, like the Homestead Act of 1860 to the traditional narrative celebrates, and as a democratic triumph, a policy that gave the common man a chance to own his own farm and fulfill the Jeffersonian ideal of a nation of independent yeoman farmers. And for millions, it did just that. Many historians now argue that the policy was deeply flawed and often failed to live up to its promise. They point out that large corporations, railroads, and speculators found loopholes to acquire the best land, leaving the less desirable parcels for the small homesteaders. Furthermore, the 160-acre plots often granted were sufficient for farming in the wet, fertile East, but woefully inadequate for the arid conditions of the West, leading many homesteaders to failure. The frail end of the Homestead Act was often anything but. You have no idea about any of this. You have your deed. You decide to walk out and see your new property. You follow the proprietor's directions, leaving the muddy town behind and heading out onto the open prairie. You find the plot, marked by a few wooden stakes. You stand on your land, and you see the problem. The creek the proprietor mentioned is a bone-dry ditch, likely filled with water for only a few weeks during the spring melt. The land itself is not rich loam, it's hard-packed dirt, covered in sagebrush and rocks. It would take an army with modern machinery to make this land arable. You look at your deed, then at the useless patch of dirt you just bought. You've been had. The proprietor didn't sell you a prime piece of ranch land. He sold you a liability. He sold you a worthless plot at an inflated price, and he did it with a smile and a piece of paper that is probably legally binding. Your attempt to buy your way into the community has only resulted in you being swindled more thoroughly than ever before. You stand alone on your worthless property, the vast empty sky stretching out above you, mocking your naivety. Standing on your newly acquired, utterly useless plot of land, you feel a shift in the air. The bright, harsh sun of midday is beginning to be hazed over by a thin veil of high clouds. The wind, which had been a steady, dry breeze, picks up, carrying a different scent, the smell of distant rain in charged air. You look to the west, and the horizon, which was a clear, sharp line just an hour ago, is now a bruised, purple smudge. A storm is coming. You, a city dweller, think of storms as an inconvenience. You might get wet running from a taxi to your front door. A thunderstorm might knock out the power for a few hours. It's a temporary disruption to an otherwise orderly existence. You are about to learn that in the West, weather is not a backdrop. It is an active, often violent, character in the story. You start the walk back to town, a growing sense of urgency propelling you forward. The sky darkens with alarming speed. The temperature plummets. One moment it was hot and dusty, the next the wind has a sharp, biting edge to it. The distant rumble you heard a few minutes ago is now a continuous, deep growl. This is your mainstream history lesson for the night. The climate of the Great Plains and the Mountain West is one of extremes. It is a semi-weird region characterized by violent, sudden shifts in weather. Blizzards could dump feet of snow in a matter of hours, burying livestock and trapping people in their homes. Flash floods could turn a dry gully and arroyo into a raging torrent in minutes, sweeping away everything in their path, which could flatten an entire season's worth of crops in the time it takes to run for cover. Settlers who came from the more temperate, predictable climates of the East, where you're poor, often tragically unprepared for the sheer ferocity of the weather. You're about halfway back to town when the first drops of rain begin to fall. They aren't gentle, soft drops. They are huge, heavy, and cold, splattering in the dust around your feet like tiny explosions. Within a minute, the drizzle becomes a downpour. The sky opens up, and a sheet of blinding rain, driven sideways by the gale force wind, engulfs you. You are soaked to the skin in seconds. The water is shockingly cold, and your teeth begin to chatter. And then comes the hail. This is the weird, terrifying fact about prairie storms. It starts with a few small, pea-sized tones, but they quickly grow larger. Soon, you are being pelted with ice the size of marbles, then gumballs. They strike your head and shoulders with painful force. You instinctively try to shield your head with your arms. The sound is deafening, a roar of wind and a relentless, percussive drumming of ice against the hard-packed earth. This isn't just a storm, it's an assault. You see a rabbit caught in the open, struck by a large hailstone and knocked senseless. The natural world here is not benign. This brutal display of nature's power connects to a historical debate surrounding the settlement of the West. In the late 19th century, a popular and dangerously wrong theory known as rain follows the plow gained traction. Promoted by land speculators and some scientists who should have known better, the theory claimed that human settlement and agriculture would change the climate of the arid West. Plowing the land, they argued, would release moisture into the air, and the smoke from trains and the planting of trees would encourage cloud formation, leading to increased rainfall. The rain will follow the plow was the optimistic slogan used to lure settlers to lands that were fundamentally unsuited for the kind of farming they knew. This theory was, of course, completely false. The settlement boom of the 1870s and early 1880s happened to coincide with a period of unusually wet years, which seemed to prove the theory correct. But when the climate inevitably returned to its normal, drier cycle, the result was catastrophic. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s was the ultimate, tragic refutation of this misguided optimism. Historians still debate the motivations behind this theory. Scientific hypothesis, or was it cynical propaganda, a deliberate lie told by railroads and land companies to sell worthless land to unsuspecting families. As you cower under the barrage of ice, you realize that the land itself and its climate has always been the ultimate arbiter of success and failure here. Deaf to theories and advertisements, you finally spot a small rocky outcrop, a shallow overhang that offers meager protection. You scramble towards it, huddling against the cold stone as the storm rages around you. The main street of the town, which was a river of mud before, is now a genuine, fast-moving river. The noise, the cold, and the sheer violence of the storm are overwhelming. Your wealth, your deed to a piece of this godforsaken, and your city-bred intelligence all are meaningless. You are just a small, soft creature caught in the open, completely at the mercy of a force you cannot control, predict, or comprehend. The storm isn't just weather, it's a statement. It's the land reminding you, in no uncertain terms, of who is really in charge here. And it's not you. The hail stops, the rain eases to a drizzle, and then a pale, watery sun breaks through the clouds. The air is washed clean and smells of wet earth and sage, but the landscape is transformed. The ground is littered with hailstones, looking like scattered jewels in the mud. Small gullies have become rushing streams. You emerge from your rocky shelter, shivering, bruised, and covered in a layer of mud. Every muscle aches from the cold and the tension. As you squelch your way back towards town, the world seems eerily quiet, broken only by the drip of water from the rocks. But the quiet is an illusion. The storm has stirred the local inhabitants, and not just the human ones. You almost step on a rattlesnake, coiled and sluggish from the cold, seeking the warmth of a sun-baked rock. You leap back, your heart hammering against your ribs. The snake, equally startled, gives a warning rattle and slithers away into the brush. This is your mainstream history point for the night. The wildlife of the American West was a constant presence and a source of both sustenance and danger. Settlers had to contend with a host of animals that are now confined to national parks and remote wilderness areas. Grizzly bears, mountain lions, and packs of wolves were a genuine threat to both livestock and humans. The romantic image of the lone cowboy singing to his cattle under the stars often leaves out the part where he's staying awake to guard them from predators. Your near miss with the rattlesnake is a stark reminder that the ground beneath your feet is not empty. But snakes are not the only concern. As you walk, you see a coyote trot across a nearby ridge, its form silhouetted against the clearing sky. It stops, looks at you with intelligent, yellow eyes, and then continues on its way, unfazed. The encounter feels primal, a brief acknowledgement between two very different inhabitants of the same harsh landscape. Now for a weird and wonderful fact about Western wildlife. One of the most feared and misunderstood creatures was not a large predator, but a small insect. The Rocky Mountain locust. These weren't just ordinary grasshoppers. They formed biblical scale swarms that could be miles wide and thousands of feet deep, containing trillions of insects. A swarm could blot out the sun for hours, and the sound of their collective chewing was described as a deafening roar. When they descended on a farm, they would eat everything: crops, grass, leather harnesses, the clothes off your back, even the wool off a sheep's back. The devastation was absolute, capable of ruining a family in a single afternoon. A locust swarm, in 1875, known as Albert's Swarm, was estimated to be the largest in recorded history, covering an area larger than the state of California. Then, mysteriously, around the turn of the 20th century, the Rocky Mountain locust went completely extinct. The exact cause remains one of entomology's greatest unsolved mysteries. This very mystery ties into an ongoing scientific and historical debate. What was the true environmental impact of westward expansion? The traditional narrative focuses on the most visible changes: the plowing of the prairies, the damming of rivers, the hunting of the buffalo to near extinction. But the reality was far more complex and subtle. The extinction of the Rocky Mountain locust is a prime example. Some scientists believe that the plowing of the river valleys where the locusts laid their eggs destroyed their breeding grounds, inadvertently wiping them out. In this view, the settlers' greatest feat of pest control was a complete accident. Others argue for different factors like climate shifts or disease. The debate highlights how little we still understand about the delicate ecological balance that was irrevocably altered by the arrival of settlers, their plows, and their livestock. The West wasn't an empty wilderness, it was a complex, functioning ecosystem that was systematically dismantled, often by people who had no idea what they were doing. You finally reach the edge of town. The place is a wreck. The main street is a quagmire, deeper and more treacherous than before. A wooden awning has been torn from the front of the blacksmith's shop. You see a dead chicken floating in a large puddle. The townsfolk are emerging from their homes and businesses, not in a panic, but with a kind of resigned weariness. They've seen this before. This is just part of the price of living here. They get to work, clearing debris, checking on their neighbors, assessing the damage. There's a sense of shared purpose, of communal resilience in the face of a common enemy. You, on the other hand, are just a wet, shivering, isolated wreck. The snake, the coyote, the stories of locusts, they all reinforce the same lesson. This land has its own rules, its own inhabitants, its own ancient rhythms of life and death. You are not even a spectator. You are not even a spectator. You are simply in the way. Your wealth can't buy you immunity from a rattlesnake bite, and your deed to the land means nothing to a swarm of locusts. You are a fragile, ignorant trespasser in a world that is far older, more powerful, and more dangerous than you ever imagined. You finally make it back to the dubious sanctuary of the Grand Hotel. You peel off your soaked, muddy clothes, unhang them futilely around your small room, which now smells like a damp cave. You are cold, still feverish from your cold, and now emotionally battered by the storm and its aftermath. You lie on the bed, listening to the drip of water from the eaves and the renewed clamor from the street as the town begins its recovery. As evening falls, you hear a commotion from downstairs. It's a different kind of noise than the usual drunken din of the saloon. There's a buzz of excitement, the sound of people gathering. Your curiosity, a surprisingly resilient trait, gets the better of you. You put on your only other set of clothes, another fine suit, which feels laughably out of place, and head downstairs. The hotel lobby is packed. Men have shed their mud-caked work clothes and are dressed in their town attire, which mostly means a cleaner version of their usual flannel shirts. You ask the proprietor, who seems to be in an unusually good mood, what's going on. It's the troupe, he says, beaming. The Shakespearean players just arrived. They're putting on a show tonight in the dining hall, a real cultural event. Culture, Shakespeare. The words are like a lifeline. This, finally, is something you understand. You envision a night of high art, a moment of civilized reprieve from the grit and grime. You gladly pay the 50 cents for a ticket, another inflated price you don't even question. This is your mainstream history fact for the night. Traveling entertainment was a huge part of life on the frontier. In an era before movies or radio, any live performance was a major event. These weren't just theatrical troupes. There were traveling circuses, medicine shows which were more entertainment than medicine, musical acts, and lecturers. They moved from town to town, following the railroad lines and mining booms, bringing a touch of the outside world to isolated communities. For people starved for novelty, the arrival of a traveling show was a holiday. You find a seat on a bench in the hastily rearranged dining hall. A makeshift stage has been set up at one end, lit by several extra kerosene lamps that fill the room with a flickering, smoky light. The audience is a mix of everyone you've seen in town: miners, cowboys, merchants, and even a few of the respectable women with their husbands, seated in the front rows. The atmosphere is boisterous and informal. Men are still drinking, and someone is passing around a bag of roasted peanuts. The Shakespearean players finally make their entrance. It's a troupe of 4 men and 2 women, looking as travel-worn as you feel. Their costumes, arabas, are a mix of faded velvet, cheap satin, and what looks suspiciously like painted cardboard. The lead actor, a man with a booming voice and a dramatic mustache, announces that tonight they will be performing a condensed version of Hamlet. What follows is not Shakespeare as you know it. It's a high melodrama, Cliff Notes version of the play. The actors don't just speak their lines, they bellow them, with wild gestures and exaggerated expressions, to be heard over the noisy crowd. The famous to be, or not to be soliloquy is delivered with the actor holding a real and rather large dagger to his chest, his eyes rolling back in his head. The audience loves it. They cheer for Hamlet, his Claudius, and shout unsolicited advice to the actors on stage. When Ophelia drowns, one of the miners in the front row yells, "Should a learned to swim, honey?" to a great roar of laughter. This is the weird but true detail of 19th century theater. Audiences were not passive and polite. They were active, vocal participants. They saw the theater as a two-way street. They would throw things flowers if they liked the performance, rotten vegetables if they didn't. They would stomp, cheer, and catcall. An actor's success depended not just on their talent, but on their ability to command and connect with these unruly crowds. The quiet, reverent silence of a modern theater would have been seen as a sign that the show was a failure. Your initial horror at this butchering of the bard slowly gives way to a strange fascination. This isn't high art, it's popular entertainment, raw and immediate, and it leads to a historical debate that scholars of performance studies often engage in. Was the lowbrow entertainment of the 19th century just a dumbed-down version of highbrow art, or was it a distinct and valid cultural form? In its own right, some argue that these traveling troupes were hacks who mangled great works for ignorant audiences, but others contend that they were brilliant adapters, skillfully transforming complex material into something that resonated with the values and experiences of the frontier. They argue that this illegitimate theater, with its melodrama, spectacle, and audience participation, was a vibrant and important part of American culture, not just a pale imitation of what was happening in the grand theaters of London or New York. As the play reaches its bloody conclusion, with the stage littered with bodies, the audience erupts in thunderous applause. The actors take their bows, looking exhausted but triumphant. You find yourself clapping along, not because you enjoyed the Shakespeare, but because you're caught up in the sheer, unadulterated energy of the room. For the first time since you arrived, you feel a flicker of connection to the people around you. You are all sharing the same absurd, chaotic, and strangely joyful experience. It's not the refined, civilized moment you were hoping for. It's something much messier, much louder, and, in its own way, much more authentic. The West's version of culture, like everything else, is not what you expected. It's loud, it's crude, and it's vibrantly, undeniably alive. The energy from the play dissipates as quickly as it came. The crowd files out, leaving the dining hall smelling of kerosene, sweat, and stale peanuts. You retreat to your room, the actors' bellowed lines still ringing in your ears. The brief sense of community you felt has faded, leaving you alone again with your thoughts. Lying in the dark, you are struck by how little you truly know about what is happening in the world. Back home, you'd have a stack of morning newspapers, telegrams with stock prices, a constant flow of information. Here, you are in an information vacuum. The next morning, driven by this craving for news, you head to the Emporium. You see a man reading a tattered newspaper and ask the proprietor if he has any for sale. "This is last week's," the proprietor says, gesturing to the man's paper. "Came in on the train with you. The next one ain't due for a few more days. A week-old newspaper. That is the freshest information available. This is your mainstream history fact for the night." While the telegraph had connected the country since the 1842s, its use was expensive and generally reserved for urgent business or government matters. For most people on the frontier, the primary source of news from the outside world was the newspaper, and its speed was limited to the speed of the train or stagecoach that carried it. News of major events in the East, or even in the next territory over, could take days or weeks to arrive. Life was lived in a state of chronic informational delay. You feel a pang of frustration. You have no idea what the markets are doing, what's happening in Congress, or if there's any news from your business associates back in Chicago. You are completely disconnected. You notice a small, smudged GY single-sheet paper lying on the counter. The masthead reads the Clarion, and it's filled with dense, poorly set type. "What's this, you ask?" "That's our local paper," the proprietor says with a shrug. "Old man Hemlock prints it up whenever he gets around to it, mostly just gossip and dads." You pick it up. This is the voice of the town itself, but it's not a professional journalistic enterprise. It's a booster paper, filled with wildly optimistic articles about the town's glorious future, proclaiming it the gateway to the West and the future metropolis of the plains. It lists new arrivals. Your own is not mentioned, thankfully, reports on a church social, and contains a lengthy, rambling editorial by the editor on the moral failings of the town council. The actual news is minimal, and here we find a weird and wonderful fact about frontier journalism. Many small-town newspaper editors were notoriously eccentric and opinionated figures. They were often one-man operations, acting as reporter, editor, typesetter, printer, and publisher. Their papers were deeply personal, filled with their own biases, feuds, and pet causes. A rival editor in the next town wasn't just a competitor. He was a mortal enemy to be insulted in print every week. Mark Twain himself famously got his start in this world of rough-and-tumble frontier journalism in Nevada, and his experiences shaped his satirical voice. These papers were less about objective reporting and more about creating a personality for the town, usually in the image of the editor himself. You skim the smudged columns of the Clarion, and a small notice catches your eye. It's a report on a recent skirmish between the U.S. Army and a band of Cheyenne warriors, which supposedly took place about 50 miles north of your location. The article describes it as a glorious victory, where a small cavalry patrol bravely fought off a savage attack by bloodthirsty redskins. It's written in a tone of heroic, jingoistic certainty. Later in the day, nursing a cup of gritty coffee in the dining hall, you overhear two prospectors talking in hushed tones. They have just come down from the north. They speak of the same event, but their version is completely different. They talk of a panicked, poorly laid cavalry patrol that stumbled upon a Cheyenne hunting party and opened fire without provocation. They speak of a massacre, not a battle, and of women and children being caught in the crossfire, worried that the event will lead to wider conflict and make the whole region unsafe for travel. You are now in possession of two completely contradictory versions of the same event. The official, printed version from the local paper, and the whispered, first-hand account from men who were near the scene. This places you directly in the center of a historical debate that rages to this day. How do we reconstruct the past when the available sources are biased and conflicting? The official military reports and the sensationalist newspaper articles of the era often painted one picture, while the oral histories of Native Americans and the private diaries of settlers and soldiers painted a very different one. Which story is true? The historian's job is not simply to read the sources, but to cross-examine them, to understand the biases of the authors, and to piece together the most likely version of events from fragmentary and often untrustworthy evidence. There is no single, easy truth to be found in the archives of the West. The discrepancy leaves you feeling deeply uneasy. The world, which already felt physically dangerous, now feels informationally treacherous as well. You can't trust the law and titles. And now you learn you can't even trust the news. The stories people tell, the reports they print, they are all shaped by agenda, by fear, by prejudice. The truth is as unstable and shifting as the muddy ground beneath your feet. You fold up the little newspaper, its bold proclamations of victory now seeming hollow and sinister. In this information fog, the only thing you know for sure is that you know nothing at all. Your growing sense of unease solidifies into a low-grade fear. The prospector's story of the skirmish combined with the marshal's earlier threat makes you feel incredibly exposed. What if the conflict spreads? What if you're caught in the middle of it? You look at the men in the saloon, at the ranchers on the street, and you see the pistols holstered at their hips. A thought, born of pure panic, enters your mind. You need a gun. It seems like the logical next step in this insane world. If the law won't protect you, if the very fabric of society is a sham, then you must rely on yourself. The myth of the West, after all, is built on the image of the self-reliant individual, and his greatest tool is the six-shooter. You, a man who has never held a firearm in his life, decide you must become a gunslinger. You walk into the emporium, which, of course, also serves as the town's gun shop. A rack on the wall holds an assortment of rifles and shotguns, and under a glass case on the counter is a selection of revolvers. The proprietor, your swindler and extortionist accomplice, greets you with the same oily smile. Looking for some personal protection, he asks, his eyes gleaming. He's not just selling you an item. He's selling you an item. He's selling you an idea. A feeling of power. This is your mainstream history fact for the night. The availability of firearms on the frontier was unprecedented. Thanks to mass production techniques pioneered by men like Samuel Colt and Oliver Winchester, reliable, multi-shot firearms became affordable and accessible to the general population for the first time in history. The Colt Peacemaker revolver and the Winchester repeating rifle are iconic for a reason. They were the tools that armed the West. Acquiring a gun was as easy as buying a shovel or a sack of flour. There were no waiting periods, no background checks. If you had the cash, you could walk out armed to the teeth. I want the best one you have, you say, trying to sound like you know what you're talking about. He pulls a beautiful revolver from the case. It has a nickel finish and an ivory grip. The Colt single-action Army. he says reverently, the peacemaker. The gun that won the West. He places it on the counter. It's heavy, solid, a masterpiece of lethal engineering. You buy it, along with a fancy leather holster and a box of cartridges. The cost is astronomical, but you pay it without a thought. You are buying security, and no price is too high. You take your new possession back to your room and strap it on. The weight on your hip is both reassuring and deeply alien. You feel ridiculous, like a child playing dress up. You draw the gun from the holster. It's clumsy and awkward. You try to spin it like you've seen in illustrations. It almost falls out of your hand. You are not a natural. This brings us to a very weird and very important fact about the gunfighter myth. The classic image of the fast draw duel at high noon is almost entirely a creation of Hollywood and pulp fiction. Real-life shootouts were clumsy, chaotic, and terrifying affairs. They usually happened at close range, involved multiple people shooting wildly, and were over in seconds. Accuracy was abysmal. The idea of two men standing in the street, coolly facing each other down, is a romantic invention. Violence was an ambush from behind or a messy, panicked brawl where more shots missed than hit. Furthermore, being a gunfighter wasn't a respected profession, it was a euphemism for a killer and a social outcast. Men who lived by the gun, like Wild Bill Hickok on Wesley Hard End, were feared, not admired. They lived paranoid, lonely lives and almost universally died violent deaths. The idea of the noble, heroic gunslinger is a 20th century fantasy. This reality is at the heart of a major historical debate: how violent was the Old West. Really, the traditional view, fueled by popular culture, is of a place of constant, casual bloodshed. However, a wave of revisionist history, starting in the mid-20th century, has argued that the West was actually far less violent than its reputation suggests. These historians dug into court records and old newspapers and found that the homicide rates in famous cattle towns like Dodge City and Tombstone were, in some years, lower than those of many modern American cities. They argue that the perception of violence was wildly inflated by sensationalist reporting and the enduring power of the gunfighter myth. This debate is still active. More recent scholarship suggests the truth is somewhere in the middle, that violence was not constant but came in episodic, concentrated bursts, often tied to specific economic or ethnic conflicts. The violent West versus the peaceful West is likely a false dichotomy, but you don't know any of this. You only have the myth, and now you have the gun. You decide you need to practice. You walk out to your useless plot of land. It has to be good for something and set up a tin can on a rock. You stand back, adopt what you imagine as a gunslinger stance, take careful aim, and pull the trigger. The explosion is deafening, far louder than you imagined. The recoil slams your wrist back with shocking force. The gun bucks in your hand and smoke fills the air. The tin can remains, untouched on its rock. You've missed, from 20 paces. You try again. And again. You fire all 6 shots, and the can is still sitting there mocking you. The reality of your situation crashes down on you. This gun is not confer skill or courage. In your untrained hands, it is not a tool of protection, it is a liability. You are more likely to shoot yourself in the foot than to hit an actual moving target. In a real conflict, you wouldn't be the stoic hero. You would be the first one to die, fumbling with a weapon you don't understand. The heavy piece of metal on your hip no longer feels reassuring. It feels like an anchor, an iron-heavy symbol of your own profound and dangerous incompetence. The smell of gunpowder hangs in the air, a testament to your complete failure as a marksman. As you stand there, reloading your fancy new revolver with fumbling fingers, you notice you are not alone. A man is watching you from a distance. He is not one of the white settlers from the town. He is Native American, his long hair braided, his clothes a mixture of traditional buckskin and a worn wool blanket. He is just standing there, on a slight rise, his expression unreadable. Your first reaction is a jolt of fear, fueled by the sensationalist story in the Clarion and the latent prejudices of your time. You instinctively tighten your grip on your useless gun. Is he a scout for a war party? Is he the savage of the newspapers the myths you've absorbed are telling you to be afraid? He makes no move towards you. He simply watches. After a long moment, he turns and walks away, disappearing over the ridge as silently as he appeared. The encounter leaves you shaken, but also curious. He didn't look like a bloodthirsty redskin. He just looked like a man in his own land, watching a foolish stranger make a fool of himself. This brings you face to face with one of the most significant and painful aspects of the American West, the relationship between the settlers and the indigenous peoples. Your mainstream history lesson for the night is a somber one. The story of westward expansion is also the story of the displacement, desposage, and destruction of Native American societies. Through a combination of warfare, broken treaties, forced relocations to reservations, and the deliberate destruction of their primary food source, the buffalo, the U.S. government in the tide of settlers systematically dismantled a way of life that had existed for centuries. It is a history fraught with violence, betrayal, and profound cultural misunderstanding. The very term Indian is a colonial misnomer, a blanket term that erases the vast diversity of the peoples it purports to describe. The man you just saw could have been Cheyenne, Arapaho, Lakota, Ute, each with a unique language, culture, and history. To you, and to most settlers of the time, he was just an Indian, a representative of a monolithic, alien other. This misunderstanding gives rise to a truly weird and pervasive myth, the noble savage. This was a romanticized stereotype, the flip side of the bloodthirsty savage coin. In this view, Native Americans were portrayed as purer, more spiritual beings, living in perfect harmony with nature, uncorked by the evils of civilization. While it may seem like a more positive stereotype, it was just as dehumanizing. It denied Native peoples their complexity, their internal conflict structures, their internal conflicts, and their own histories. It turned them into symbols rather than recognizing them as human beings. The man on the hill was likely not pondering the Great Spirit and his harmony with the earth. He might have been worried about where his family's next meal was coming from, or angry about the encroachment on his traditional hunting grounds, or simply amused by your terrible shooting. Your brief, silent encounter puts you in the middle of a central, and still raw, historical debate. Was the conflict between settlers and Native Americans an unavoidable clash of civilizations, a tragic but inevitable consequence of progress, or was it a more calculated campaign of conquest and ethnic cleansing? The traditional 19th century view, steeped in ideas of manifest destiny and racial superiority, strongly favored the former. It portrayed the conflict as a natural process where a superior civilization inevitably replaced an inferior one. However, for the last several decades, historians have overwhelmingly challenged this narrative. They point to the scores of treaties signed and then broken by the U.S. government, the documented massacres of non-combatants, and the stated policies of Indian removal as evidence of a deliberate, systematic conquest. They argue that it wasn't an unavoidable tragedy, but a series of choices made by people in power, driven by greed for land and resources. The Indian Wars were not a clash of equals, but a series of desperate, defensive actions by people fighting for their very survival against a technologically and numerically superior invading force. As you walk back to town, the weight of the gun on your hip feels different again. You bought it out of fear of a savage threat, a threat manufactured by newspapers and rumor. But your silent encounter on the prairie has planted a seed of doubt. Who is the real intruder here? Who is the real threat? You, with your trunk full of money, your fraudulent deed to a piece of stolen land, and your brand new gun, are the face of the invasion. The man on the hill was not a threat to you. You are a threat to him. His world is being systematically destroyed to make way for yours. The fear you feel is a pale echo of the existential terror his people have been facing for generations. You came to the West to make your mark. But you are beginning to understand that your mark is a scar on all landscape and a culture that was here long before you. Haunted by the silent judgment of the man on the hill, you return to town. The sky is now a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the mud from the storm is beginning to dry into a cracked, dusty crust. As you approach the still soggy end of the main street near the railway line, you see a group of men working. They are not the white miners or cowboys you're used to seeing. They are Chinese, their distinctive conical hats and simple blue cotton clothes setting them apart. They are repairing a section of track that was washed out by the storm, working with a quiet, focused efficiency that is almost mesmerizing. No one is supervising them. No one is talking to them. They work as an isolated unit, their movements economical, their voices a low murmur of a language you don't understand. The white townsfolk walk past them without a glance, as if they are part of the landscape, like rocks or trees. You stop to watch, intrigued by this silent, industrious community existing in a parallel world to the one you've been experiencing. This is your mainstream history fact for the night. Chinese immigrants were absolutely essential to the construction of the American West, recruited in huge numbers to build the western portion of the transcontinental railroad. They performed some of the most difficult and dangerous labor. They blasted tunnels through the solid granite of the Sierra Nevada, laid track across the scorching deserts of Nevada and Utah, and did it all for lower wages and under harsher conditions than their white counterparts. The completion of the railroad in 1816, a pivotal moment in American history, would have been impossible without their labor. You watch one man, small in stature but weary and strong, lift a heavy iron rail with two others, their movements perfectly synchronized. Their existence here is a paradox. They built the very artery of commerce that allows this town to exist, yet they are treated as invisible, almost subhuman, by the people who benefit from their work. This leads to a weird and shameful fact about the experience of Chinese immigrants in the West: the rampant, often violent, racism they faced. They were derided in newspapers, targeted by discriminatory laws, and subjected to brutal mob violence. A wave of anti-Chinese sentiment swept through the West in the latter half of the 19th century, fueled by economic anxiety and racial prejudice. White workers feared that the Chinese, who were willing to work for less, were driving down wages. This resentment culminated in horrific events like the 1885 Rock Springs Massacre in Wyoming, where a white mob attacked Chinese miners, killing dozens and burning their homes to the ground. This anti-immigrant hysteria eventually led to a landmark piece of federal legislation, and that legislation is at the heart of a major historical debate, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This was the first law in American history to explicitly ban a specific ethnic group from immigrating to the United States. On one side of the debate, some historians, particularly older generations, have framed it as a regrettable but perhaps understandable response to the economic pressures of the time, a move to protect American labor. They focus on the political and economic context that led to its passage. However, the overwhelming consensus among modern historians is that the act was a fundamentally racist piece of legislation, a national disgrace that codified prejudice into law. They argue that the economic arguments were a smokescreen for deep-seated racial animosity. They point to the dehumanizing language used in political cartoons and newspapers of the era, which portrayed the Chinese as a yellow peril unclean, opium-addicted, and morally corrupt. This view holds that the Chinese Exclusion Act was not about economics, it was about defining who could and could not be American, and it drew a clear racial line. The legacy of this act was long-lasting, setting a precedent for future discriminatory immigration policies and shaping race relations in the U.S. for decades to come. As you watch the crew work, the hotel proprietor comes out onto his porch and spits a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. He sees you watching the Chinese workers. "Don't waste your time with them," he says, his voice dripping with contempt. "Celestials, they're a blight on this country. The casual, unthinking venom in his voice is shocking. These men, whose labor is literally paving the way for the progress he profits from, are seen as less than nothing. They are not part of the social fabric of the town, not even on the lowest rung. They are entirely outside of it, a separate, reviled caste. You look from the proprietor's sneering face to the faces of the Chinese workers. They don't react. Their expression's impassive. They have learned that survival in this place depends on a kind of dignified invisibility. You, with your money and your white skin, have been swindled, threatened, and mocked. You have felt like an outsider. But you now realize there are levels of outsider. You're an outsider who is at least visible, who is part of the game, even if you are losing. These men are so far outside that they aren't even allowed to play. You thought you were at the bottom of the social ladder in this town. You were wrong. There is a whole other ladder beneath you, one built on a foundation of prejudice you had never even considered. Your day of humbling revelations continues. Having witnessed the invisible labor of the Chinese workers, you turn your gaze to another icon of the West, one you've seen plenty of since you arrived, the cowboy. You see them in the saloon, on the street, and in the quarrels. In your mind, they are figures of romance and adventure, free roaming knights of the prairie, masters of their own destiny, embodying a rugged individualism that you in your soft city life secretly admire. You wander back over to the corrals at the edge of town, where a group of cowboys is preparing for a cattle drive. The air is thick with the smell of dust, leather, and livestock. The work looks hot, dirty, and dangerous. They are branding calves, the smell of singed hair sharp in the air, and sorting cattle into different pens. Their movements are efficient, born of long practice. A young man, probably not much older than 20, is trying to break a particularly stubborn horse in a round pen. The horse bucks and rears, a furious whirlwind of muscle and hooves. The cowboy is thrown, landing hard in the dirt. He gets up slowly, dusts himself off with a grimace, and immediately gets back on. There is no glamour in this moment, only grit and a high probability of serious injury. This is your mainstream history fact for the night. The life of a cowboy was nothing like the romanticized version. It was a job of grueling, monotonous, low-paying manual labor. The great cattle drives of the post-Civil War era, which are the source of most cowboy lore, lasted only about 20 years, from the late 1860s to the mid-1880s. For a few months a year, a cowboy would push thousands of cattle hundreds of miles north from Texas to the railheads in Kansas or Nebraska. The work was 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, in all weather conditions, for about $1 a day. The diet was monotonous: beef, beans, coffee. The danger of stampedes, river crossings, and injuries was constant, and the loneliness was profound. As you watch the men work, you start to notice details that clash with the myth. They are not all strapping, heroic white men. You see a black cowboy working side by side with the others, his skill with a rope just as evident. You also notice a man who is clearly of Mexican descent, a vaquero whose saddle and gear seem more ornate and practiced than the others. And here is your weird but crucial historical fact: the American cowboy owes almost everything to the Mexican vaquero. The entire culture of the open-range cattle industry, the gear, lassos, chaps, western saddles, the techniques, and even the terminology rodeo, lasso, stampede, ranch was adapted directly from the vaquero tradition that had existed in Mexico and the American Southwest for centuries. Furthermore, historians estimate that as many as 1 in 4 cowboys on the Texas cattle drives was African American, many of them former slaves who found more freedom and opportunity on the open range than anywhere else in post-war America. The classic image of the all-white cowboy is a whitewash-up of a much more diverse and complex reality. The myth of the lone, independent cowboy is also misleading. This brings us to a historical debate about the nature of cowboy labor. Were they the free-spirited individualists of legend, or were they essentially just migratory wage laborers, the 19th century equivalent of agricultural gig workers? The evidence strongly supports the latter. Cowboys were employees. They worked for large cattle companies or powerful ranch owners. They followed the orders of a trail boss. They were subject to the whims of the market. When the cattle doctress ended due to the invention of barbed wire, which closed off the open range, and the expansion of the railroads, which made long drives unnecessary, the cowboys' job largely disappeared. Many were left adrift, unskilled in anything but a trade that no longer existed. The historians' debate then is about how this myth of the independent hero became so powerful, eclipsing the much more mundane reality of their lives. Some argue it was the dime novels and, later, Hollywood that deliberately created the heroic image for entertainment. Others suggest the cowboys themselves cultivated the myth as a way of giving meaning and dignity to their hard, unglamorous lives. They were a proud, rough group of men who developed a strong occupational culture, and the myth was a part of that culture. You watch the young man get thrown from the horse again. This time, he doesn't get up as quickly. He lies on the ground for a moment, and his friends rush over to help him up. He's limping. His day's work, and possibly his career, could be over in that one instant. There is no workers' compensation, no health insurance. If he can't work, he doesn't get paid. You look at your own soft, uncalloused hands. You thought these men were free. You're beginning to realize that they are trapped in a different kind of system. They are not their own masters. They are wage slaves to the cattle barons, selling their youth and their bodies for a pittance, all for the sake of getting beef to the tables of people like you back in the East. The freedom of the open range is an illusion. It's just a different kind of factory, one with a much bigger sky. The romance of the cowboy, you realize, is a story best enjoyed from a very, very safe distance. A few days pass. Your cold slowly subsides into a lingering cough. The town has recovered from the storm. The mud has turned to dust, and the rhythms of daily life have resumed. But you feel a strange tension in the air, an undercurrent of anxiety that wasn't there before. The price of supplies at the emporium has gone up. The talk in the saloon is less about tall tales and more about low-grade or veins and dwindling water sources. One morning, you see a family loading all of their worldly possessions onto a rickety wagon. The woman from the small house with the defiant garden is among them. The garden is already starting to wilt. They are leaving. Later that day, you see a for sale sign hastily nailed to the door of the blacksmith shop. You ask the hotel proprietor what's happening. For once, his smugness is gone, replaced by a sullen worry. The yellow streak came mine, he says, gesturing vaguely towards the hills. The main veins played out. They hit granite. It's over. The town's entire reason for being, the nearby gold and silver mine that sparked its creation, is dead. And with it, the town itself is dying. This is your mainstream history fact for the night. The boom and bust cycle was the fundamental economic reality of the mining West. A rumor of a strike would create a boomtown almost overnight, drawing in thousands of prospectors, merchants, saloon keepers, and laborers. But these towns were built on a foundation of finite resources. When the gold or silver ran out, which it inevitably did, the bust would follow. The population would vanish as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind empty buildings, unshattered dreams. For every legendary, long-lasting mining city like Denver, there were 1,000 ghost towns that flickered into existence for a few years and then died. You are witnessing the bust in real time. The town's prosperity was an illusion, the temporary bubble inflated by a geological anomaly. Your own investments, the worthless plot of land, the useless gun, the exorbitant hotel bills, now seem even more foolish. You didn't invest in a growing community, you bought a ticket on a sinking ship. And here we find a weird, specific feature of these boom and bust cycles: the humbug. A humbug was a fake or exaggerated mining claim. A clever prospector might alt a worthless mine by firing shotgun shells full of gold dust into the rock walls, or by dropping a few real nuggets for others to discover. They would then sell off shares in the worthless claim to gullible investors, people exactly like you, before disappearing with the money. The entire Western mining economy was rife with this kind of speculation and outright fraud. The line between a genuine boom and a manufactured humbug was often dangerously thin. The rapid decline of your town places you at the center of a historical debate that geographers and environmental historians still explore. Was the settlement of the West a sustainable endeavor, or was it inherently a process of exploitation and depletion? The traditional narrative of taming the wilderness and building a nation often framed settlement as a permanent, positive development. It emphasizes the creation of lasting cities, farms, and industries. However, a more critical school of thought argues that much of Western settlement was, by its very nature, extractive and temporary. The mining industry tore up mountains and poisoned rivers for short-term gain. The logging industry clear-cut vast ancient forests. Even the early farming and ranching practices often depleted the soil and overgrazed the land, leading to environmental degradation like the Dust Bowl. The ghost town is not an anomaly. It is the most honest symbol of the West's economic model, a model based on taking as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and then moving on, leaving the mess for someone else to deal with. The abandoned mines, the empty storefronts, the wilting garden, they are all evidence of a culture of impermanence. The atmosphere in the town turns sour. The forced friendliness of a boom town evaporates, replaced by suspicion and resentment. People are no longer looking for opportunity, they're looking to cut their losses. The card games in the saloon become more desperate. Arguments break out more easily. The thin veneer of community has been stripped away, revealing the raw self-interest beneath. You realize that your wealth, which has been a target and a burden, is now your only salvation. Unlike the blacksmith or the miner or the woman with the garden, you can afford to leave. Your money buys you an escape hatch, but this realization brings no comfort, only a profound sense of guilt. You were a tourist in their prosperity, and you can be a tourist in their ruin. You came here seeking an authentic experience of the West. You found it. It's the bitter taste of failure, the sight of a community collapsing, the quiet tragedy of a family packing up a wagon, leaving their dead dreams behind. This, more than any gunfight or cattle drive, is the real story. It's a story of fleeting hope and inevitable disappointment, written in the dust of a dying town. The town is bleeding out, and the anxiety is getting to you. Your lingering cough seems worse, and you've developed a dull, throbbing ache in your jaw. At first, you ignore it, another discomfort in a trip full of them. But by the next morning, the ache has intensified into a sharp, insistent pain. A touch, a bad one. Back home, this would be a simple inconvenience. You'd call your dentist, get an appointment, have increase, and receive a filling or a root canal, all under the gentle bliss of local anesthesia. You might miss a half day of work. Here, in a dying town 1,000 miles from a real city, a toothache is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis. The pain becomes excruciating, a hot poker driving into your jaw. It eclipses your hunger, your fear of the town's collapse, everything. You can't eat. You can't eat. You can't sleep. You are reduced to a single, primal nerve of agony. You have to find help. You stumble to the office of Dr. Abernathy, the man who tried to poison you with mercury. He is packing his own medical books into a crate, clearly preparing to abandon the sinking ship like everyone else. He seems annoyed by your presence. You point to your swollen jaw and manage to explain the problem. He looks into your mouth, poking around with a metal tool that is visibly not cleaned. You flinch in agony. Abscess, he declares, with a grim finality. A bad one. It's got to come out. This is your mainstream history lesson for the night. Dentistry in the 19th century was a brutal affair. It was not yet a highly specialized field of medicine. Extractions were often performed by general physicians, by barbers, the origin of the red and white striped barber pole, symbolizing blood and bandages, or even by the local blacksmith, who had the strongest pair of pliers. Anesthesia was in its infancy. While ether and chloroform existed, they were risky and not always available in a remote town. For most people, the only anesthetic was a large shot of whiskey in the hope that you would pass out from the pain. The doctor lays out his tools on a stained cloth. There are no delicate, modern instruments. There is a tooth key, a fearsome-looking metal device that was designed to be clamped onto the tooth and then twisted, breaking it free from the jawbone. There are also several pairs of forceps, which look more like something you'd use to shoe a horse. This is going to hurt, the doctor says, with a stunning degree of understatement. He offers you a glass of the same 40-rod whiskey you wisely avoided in the saloon. This time you take it, gulping it down in one fiery swallow. It does little to numb the pain, but it does add a terrifying dizziness to your misery. This is where we encounter a truly weird and horrifying fact of frontier life: the turnkey. That tooth-key instrument was notorious not just for the pain it caused, but for its imprecision. It often resulted in breaking the tooth, leaving the infected root behind. Worse, it could fracture the jawbone or take out adjacent, healthy teeth along with the bad one. Imagine sitting in a chair conscious, while a man tries to wrench a tooth from your skull with a tool designed with all the finesse of a crowbar. This was not a rare horror. This was standard dental care. The impending torture highlights a historical debate about quality of life. We often think about the past in terms of major events, wars, elections, inventions. But what was the daily, physical reality for people? How did they cope with the constant, low-level and sometimes high-level pain that we can so easily medicate away? Historians of medicine and daily life argue that our ancestors lived with a level of chronic pain that is almost unimaginable to us. Arthritis, infections, injuries, and yes, rampant dental problems were just a part of life. They didn't have our remedies, so they developed a different kind of resilience, a higher tolerance for suffering that was born of necessity. Some argue this made them tougher, more stoic. Others suggest it led to lives of quiet, constant misery, often shortened by infections that started from something as simple as a bad tooth. You are not feeling stoic. You are feeling pure, unadulterated terror. The doctor approaches with the pliers. You grip the arms of the chair, your knuckles white. You are a wealthy man, a man of power and influence in your own world. You have commanded boardrooms and managed vast sums of money. But none of that matters now. In this moment, you are reduced to a terrified animal, trapped in a chair, about to be subjected to a form of medieval torture. He clamps the tool onto your tooth. The metallic scrape against the enamel sends a shockwave through your entire skull. You see a flash of white light. The world dissolves into a universe of pure, white-hot agony. You hear a sickening crunch, a sound that seems to come from the very center of your being. You have survived train travel, swindlers, storms, and your own incompetence. But this, a simple tooth, might be the thing that finally breaks you. This is the raw, unromanticized reality of the West. A reality where a tiny infection in your mouth can become a life-or-death struggle, and the price of survival is a trip to the brink of hell and back. You don't remember leaving the doctor's office. You have a vague, nightmarish memory of a world swimming in pain, the coppery taste of blood, and the doctor's grunting sounds of exertion. You find yourself back in your hotel room, collapsed on the bed, a blood-soaked trag pressed to your jaw. The immediate, sharp agony has been replaced by a deep, throbbing ache that pulses in time with your own weak heartbeat. Your head feels like it's full of cotton, and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion settles over you. You lie there for what feels like an eternity, drifting in undoubt of a feverish, pain-filled haze. The sounds of the dying town filter in through the window, the creak of a wagon being loaded, a distant, angry shout, the mournful whistle of a train arriving at the station. That sound, the train whistle, cuts through your delirium. It's the sound that brought you to this miserable place, and now, it's the sound of your only possible salvation. With a surge of desperate energy, you sit up. Your head spins, but your mind is clear for the first time in days. You have to get out. You have to get out. You have to go home. All your foolish ambitions to be a landowner, a gunslinger, a man of influence in the West have been ground into dust, just like the tooth that was ripped from your jaw. There is no romance here. There is no adventure. There is no adventure. Pain and a profound sense of your own inadequacy. This is the final, mainstream historical point of your journey. Not everyone who went west succeeded. In fact, most didn't. The popular narrative is built on the success stories, the cattle barons, the mining tycoons, the families who built 100-year ranches. But for every one of those, there were thousands of busts. There were the homesteaders whose farms failed, the prospectors who never found color, the merchants whose businesses went bankrupt, and the countless individuals who simply gave up and went back east, broken and defeated. This phenomenon of return migration is a huge, often overlooked part of the story of westward expansion. The frontier was not just a place of opportunity, it was also a place of failure on a massive scale. You are now part of that silent, defeated majority. You begin to pack. It's a frantic, clumsy process. You don't bother to fold your filthy mud-stained suits. You just stuff them into your magnificent leather trunk. The poetry books, the silver grooming set, all the symbols of the civilized life you tried to impose on this place are tossed in with barely a glance. Your hand brushes against the nickel-plated Colt revolver, your absurd purchase. You hesitate for a moment, then leave it on the bed. You don't want any part of this. Let it become another relic in this ghost town. This decision touches on a strange, ironic fact about the end of the Wild West era. What ultimately tamed the West wasn't the heroic lawmen or the civilizing influence of churches. It was, in many ways, the sheer force of corporate capitalism and technology. It was the barbed wire that closed the ranges, the refrigerated rail cars that made cattle drives obsolete, the industrial mining techniques that replaced the individual prospector, and the mail-order catalogs that brought mass-produced goods to the most remote corners of the country. The rugged individualist you tried and failed to be was being made obsolete by the very economic system that had created your wealth back home. The West was not tamed, it was assimilated. As you drag your trunk down the creaking stairs for the last time, you find yourself in the center of the final historical debate of your journey. What is the true legacy of the American West? Is it the heroic, romantic myth of rugged individualism, freedom, and manifest destiny that has so powerfully shaped American identity? Or is it a darker, more complex story of conquest, exploitation, racial violence, and environmental destruction? Is the cowboy the ultimate symbol? Or is it the ghost town? Is the hero the settler or the survivor? Historians will never fully agree, because the West is not one story, it is a multitude of conflicting stories. It is a place of brutal contradictions, of noble ideals and savage realities, of breathtaking beauty and heartbreaking tragedy. It is the story of your own journey, a tale of arrogance humbled, of wealth rendered meaningless, and of a romantic dream colliding with a brutal, indifferent reality. You don't even bother to check out. You leave the key on the counter of the deserted lobby and haul your trunk through the dusty street towards the train station. You don't look back. The town, with its false-fronted buildings and its population of ghosts, both living and dead, has already faded from your concern. You reach the platform, the same splintered planks where your disastrous journey began. The train is waiting, its steam engine hissing, ready to take you back to a world of clean water, soft beds, and painless dentistry. You have never been so happy to see a train in your life. You have survived. But you are not the same man who stepped off that train a short lifetime ago. You are poorer, wiser, and you carry a painful, empty space in your jaw that will forever remind you of the West you went looking for, and the one you actually found. And so, the train begins to pull away, its rhythmic clatter a soothing lullaby of escape. The dying town shrinks behind you, becoming just another smudge on the vast, indifferent prairie. You lean your aching head against the cool glass of the window. The vibration of the car a gentle massage for your battered body and soul. The journey back east is just beginning. But in your mind, you are already home. The raw, jagged edges of your experience begin to soften, smoothed by the promise of comfort, of safety, of a world that makes sense. The clatter of the wheels on the track becomes a steady, hypnotic rhythm, a gentle rocking, carrying you further and further away from the dust and the pain. You are floating now, not in a train car, but in that quiet, peaceful space between waking and sleeping. The anxieties of the West dissolve, replaced by a deep, profound sense of release. The world outside the window blurs into a soft tapestry of greens and blues, the colors of memory, the colors of dreams. You're safe now. Your breathing deepens, your muscles finally uncoil, and you let yourself drift on that slow, steady current, pulling you down, down, into the quiet harbor of sleep. The worries of today are gone, and the concerns of tomorrow can wait. There is only this moment of peace, this gentle descent into the stillness of the night. The end of the article. Good night.